the select board also takes the priority of this extremely important to us as well, and we've tasked the town manager with helping us find the right candidate, and if you would mind giving us an update.
Sure, thank you, Christy. The position was advertised in late October. It remains open on the website. We've had applications coming in. We've been working. The response was not as strong as we had hoped out of the gate. We continue to have applications come in. We received an application last week that looked quite promising. Met last week with the Human Rights and Inclusion Committee to kind of give them an update on where things stand. We have a meeting scheduled next week with a nonprofit that operates in the state that does a lot of work in that arena, just to get some feedback. But it remains open. I think that, you know, the phrase I use with the Human Rights and Inclusion is we want to fill it right, not fill it fast. It remains a top priority, and in a perfect world, we'll be scheduling interviews during the month of February. If we can get enough candidates pulled together for a panel, we want to use an outside expert to help us vet the candidates. So.
Excellent. That was going to be my second follow-up question, was whether or not you're working with an organization. So thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else here with new business that's not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I'll move on. Agenda item number 3, a public hearing will be held under Chapter 138 of the General Laws on the application of GMRI Inc., doing business as the Olive Garden Italian Restaurant at 153 Andover Street. Charisse Schreiber, manager. Elizabeth Pisano, representing for a change of officers and directors at that location. Hello, welcome.
Hi. Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Elizabeth Pisano from Upton, Connell, and Devlin, counsel for the Olive Garden. This is a change of officers application. There are no operational changes to the restaurant. And I can summarize the changes if it pleases the board.
We understand, and I've conferred with the town clerk, the application is complete, and actually the ABCC has actually approved this. This is one of the rare occasions where this is not specifically local. It is about your corporate officers.
Yeah.
So there's no change in local administration or the license that the town issues. I don't think we need any further information, but I'll open it up to the board members to start. Select Board Member Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, nothing further needed here.
Thank you. Select Board Member Duggan.
No questions.
Select Board Member Bernard.
No, no questions.
Select Board Member Bennett.
Nope, all set, thank you.
And I have no questions. This is a public hearing. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to the application of a change of officers at this location?
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I'll entertain a motion on agenda item number 3.
Move the application as presented.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Agenda item number 4, the board will hear a report from the Community Preservation Act Committee. Mr. Town Manager, while they're preparing, do
Sure.
you want
Thanks.
to tee up the ball?
Yes, the board received a memorandum as well as a copy of the presentation in their packets on Friday. We are joined tonight by the majority of the board-appointed CPA committee, Chairman Mike Powers, Vice Chair Ellen Graham, Dan Bennett, of course, Dan Gagnon, Carla King. I believe Ted Blake will be coming, and I don't see Mark Jones, but 5 of the 7 committee members are here. The committee was appointed in December, held a meeting in January, and at warp speed is prepared to present a recommendation, a slate of recommendations to the select board tonight. And Chair of the committee, Mike Powers, is at the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Town Manager, Mr. Chairman, Select Board. Thank you for having me. It's good to see you all again. I have a report that I'm going to present to you, and I'm going to begin with a brief overview of the elements of the Community Preservation Act. Then I'm going to review the discussions that the committee had, and then finally I'm going to have a what next comment. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it. The basic role of the CPA is to help communities in 4 basic areas. The first area involves historic preservation. Danvers is a historic town. There are several assets that we have, both in good working condition, others perhaps in need of some support and some repair, that this action will help. It'll help by giving us an opportunity to designate funds in a separate account under the jurisdiction of a CPC committee, which I will get to shortly, and individuals or the committee itself can pursue and make recommendations for expending that money in order to address certain historic preservation issues. I have some examples here for you: the Holton House, Glen Magna, the Page House, the Town Hall, and of course the library. All are integral structures, all are historic in nature, and all at different points in time are in need of various repairs. They would all be eligible for funding from this program. The second is open space. As a community, we have identified open space parcels and open space opportunities for years. We have a report that's brought forward every number of years. It escapes me now whether it's 5 or 10, but the administration reports to you a list of all of the open spaces that are there, as well as some priority and some commentary as to what those open spaces might be used for or beneficial, whether it be open space or passive recreation or some other undeveloped use. It can also be water protection, preservation. There's lots of different things that we can do. Historically, as these opportunities have presented itself, we've been in a reaction mode. The town has gone out and tried to approach buyers, and I know there are numerous attempts. We've been very frustrated because of the time it takes to negotiate with private individuals or the owners of the land who want to move or take action, and we, being an interested party, are there, but without a funding source, without a dedicated process by which we could identify the use and present the attractiveness of that person selling the land to the town, it becomes too long. It becomes too difficult and too convoluted. CPC program will help streamline that. Not that we will be able to spend monies without town meeting approval, but one where there's a set organization who can go out and talk and plan with those owners. So that could be very, very beneficial in terms of open space acquisition. Additionally, we have the maintenance and the improvement of open space. And some of the examples we have here are LaBelle's Grove, okay? Just a tremendous parcel. The town acquired some years ago with the support of the state, and there are unlimited opportunities there for improving the quality of life for Danvers residents through relatively unstructured passive recreation, family land, trails, nature work, curriculum at our schools, a tremendous number of opportunities that could present itself there. The Rebecca Nurse House, obviously, one of the most historic parcels in our community. As I said, Ian, the last one would be protecting and maintaining Endicott Park. Probably one of the most popular destinations in town. Recreation, the rail trail, a recent acquisition, relatively speaking, and one I can speak from experience is tremendously popular. As a linear park through the town, people walking, families walking, bike riders. It's a very, very heavily used, and as such, we've gone with a porous surface. It's just gravel and stone dust, so there are issues up there relative to flooding, relative to rainwater distribution, and just general maintenance. We have the support, of course, of the electric department because of the right-of-ways and the electrical poles through there. So from a recreation perspective, we benefit from that, but CPC could further enhance our ability to maintain and improve that structure. Then there are neighborhood parks, a lot of these little pocket open space lands we've talked about. When I was a member of the board, a number of those came up, and how nice it would be to be able to get those to improve the quality of life in neighborhoods this gives us the opportunity to, or would give us the opportunity to do that. Finally, community housing. We have housing needs and assessments according to our community housing plans. This program can be used to assist first-time home buyers, elderly housing, and also housing for the disabled. Those are all lofty and worthy goals of a community looking to improve the life experiences of its residents. And finally, there's the dreaded 40B. You're all familiar with that, and for those of you at home, by law, the town has to maintain 10% of the housing stock designated as affordable. If we don't, developers are able to come in and move around the 40B restrictions and essentially develop high-density building projects and all the associated land degradation, traffic, road use, none of which is beneficial or can be beneficial for the quality of life in town. If we're able to do this and support the town with the 40B maintaining their threshold, we don't need it right now, but at some point in the future, it's always coming up. So it gives us a good backup system to intercede and get some additional housing that meets the 40B requirements. How does the program work? In terms of revenue sources, this is a local property tax surcharge. People are going to say it's a tax. It is a tax. The law allows us to designate between 1% and 3% of the local property tax value paid by residents as an additional payment to be designated for these services. It is paid quarterly as part of the existing tax bill. It's a separate line on your bill. In addition to generating significant amounts of revenue, the state has maintained a matching trust program. By that, I mean there were surcharges to registry of deed fees that are collected and designated for redistribution back to communities involved in the CPC program. Currently, or during the past year, the reimbursement rate for the state was approximately 40%. So for every dollar we raised ourselves, the state would provide an additional 40 cents. An excellent annual return on an investment. This committee, whom I've had the honor of chairing and will continue as we move through the process, were appointed by the Select Board in December. We got moving quickly. We met on the 19th of January. We reviewed the, We reviewed the CPA law.
Hit it again, Mike. You hit it too fast.
Had you do it all.
There we go.
I'll give you a signal when I flip the page, okay? Sorry about that, everybody. And we looked at our previous efforts in 2016, and there was also another time, back when we were building the high school, Wayne Markey was the town manager, and he approached us as members of the board to say, what do you think of this? We thought it was a great idea. Keith Lucy and I met with the town manager, but at that time, we were developing the stabilization funds for the high school, middle school at that time. We were increasing our sales, property tax levels right up to the levy limit. We had never done that. We'd always been zero-based budgeting. And for that period, we collected as much as we could in order to fund that, in order to not have to try for a debt exclusion or a 2.5 override, which had already failed twice previously. So we were able to do it. We were able to keep everything under budget, to pay the bills, and Smith School at least has been funded in part by the stabilization program covering peak years of debt service. So it was very attractive to look at the CPC at the time, but we didn't want anything to interfere with our efforts to get this stabilization fund passed. So we did not move forward on it. Back at that time, it was around 2012. So, in terms of the options, between 1% and 3% can be collected from residents as a surcharge. And then there's a number of other exemptions and some specialty cases that we could include in our proposal. We did not. Tonight, we are presenting a 1% surcharge across the board, simple for all residents. Okay? 1%'s the minimum, no exemptions. A good question is, why? Well, looking back to 2016, those of us that were involved in that program, when we had exemptions and we had different levels and we had a lot of discussion, and they all ended up in revolving around finance and not the benefit to the community. We found that very difficult. It was confusing, and a number of people expressed at that time, I didn't vote for it because I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I didn't have enough information, which is a perfectly legitimate reason not to support something. Add to that, that was during a presidential election, so that there were a lot of people who were interested in other matters other than CPC, and it did not pass. But right now, we're going with a straight 1%. So what does that mean? Let's look at the average valued home in Danvers, which is $547,000. The average tax bill is $6,933, right? Very few people actually pay that. Many are more, many are less. But what this proposes to do is to take 1% of that value and collect it as an additional tax. $69.33 on average. We pay our property taxes quarterly. It would increase the individual quarterly tax average by $17.33. Okay? Now, what does that give us? Actually, I'm going to back, please go back. I jumped ahead a little bit. What does it give us? The local CPA amount at 1% will be approximately $840,000. That's the estimate that we would collect. The state matching funds, based on last year's reimbursement rate, would be $331,000, for a total of $1,173,000 that would flow into this account after the first year. It's money that will make a difference. It's money that will make a difference with sacrifice on the part of our property owners, absolutely. But if you were to look at it on average, it's $17. We're able to parlay a $17 quarterly payment individually to a total of $1 million to address these particular programs. The attack of the that, to the committee, is a tremendous investment and something that will serve the town very well. And then this will continue year after year. So we will build that fund. So we talk about housing, or we talk about open space acquisitions, certainly not today would we be able to do much, but in a couple of years, we would have a lot of money to support any type of acquisition. We would reduce the town's need to use debt service, okay? And it would enhance our ability to make a presentation to prospective sellers in an organized and timely manner. We have this process. We have these funds. If you're interested, we would like to work with you, and that would be one of the roles of the CPC committee. Who are they? The CPC committee consists of up to 9 people. Okay? We are recommending 7. By statute, representatives have to come from the Conservation Commission, the Preservation Commission, Planning Board, Recreation, and the Housing Authority. In addition to that, we're recommending 2 at-large seats, okay? Coming from people who would be interested and who would apply to the town. 7 seems like a reasonable number. We could do 9. That would be 4 at-large people. I don't know if that becomes a little unwieldy in terms of getting volunteers and keeping the focus of the committee where we want it, which falls into one of these categories. We can approach those people with an organized plan and an established process, not just an ad hoc town administrative people trying to track them down and saying by the time we get to the town meeting vote, we might be able to do something with you. Okay? So it gives us some tremendous flexibility, and quite honestly gives us legitimacy as a community moving forward and trying to get involved in these programs. The CPC receives and reviews the applications from project proponents The committee prepares funding recommendations for town meeting. The project are reviewed by the Select Board and the Finance Committee, and then presented as a warrant at the next town meeting, where a majority vote would approve the expenditure. Majority vote of the town meeting. So we have 2 of those per year, so it's a pretty good way of working with people. They know when the next meeting will be coming, and we'll be able, I think, work with prospective sellers much more effectively than in the past. The road ahead. We are seeking approval from the Select Board this evening. Immediately after that, our committee will meet again, and we will organize our plans for collecting signatures. We are asking you to approve the signature collection route so we can go direct to ballot. We had discussions on this, and we could have gone either proposal to you, to the Finance Committee, then to the town meeting, or we could have taken your approval and run with it and put the warrant together through the signature process. We chose the latter for a couple of different reasons. First of all, everybody on the town meeting is up for election, so we technically don't really have a town meeting or town meeting representatives that we could approach right now. There'll be some turnover due to the census this year. So we think it made sense to reach out even further and get everybody involved. This is just a local election. People who show up to vote on election day are going to be motivated residents interested in local town meeting elections, Board of Selectmen, and other elected offices, as well as this process. So we feel the people most affected are going to be the people who will go to the ballot and cast a vote that day. In 2016, I had mentioned earlier, we were part of a presidential election. We had 14,000 people vote on that day. Far more than you get on a town election. And they came in primarily because it was a presidential election. So lots of votes were cast in the committee's minds for people who weren't particularly interested or knowledgeable about this. And again, when in doubt, people tend to vote no. So if they weren't prepared and they saw this, like, oh, why would I want to increase my taxes? No. Perfectly logical without any basic reason as to why. The other reason is if we go and we collect signatures, we're talking to the townspeople. We're going out to interested organizations, making presentations. We're collecting volunteers to collect signatures. We need approximately 1,100 signatures. If we can get a sufficient number of collectors, 25 people, 50 people collecting signatures, it becomes a relatively simple task, hopefully, to get enough signatures on the sheets. And every one of those people has had an opportunity to ask questions about this particular program. So the collection of signatures is a tremendous educational tool, as well as a process by where we can legitimize and bring this forward to town meeting as a separate warrant. Obviously, the committee, with our signatures, we will encourage people to go out on May 3rd to vote. Okay? And also, there is the CPC bylaw will be presented at the town meeting, and we will encourage that vote as well. So the signatures get it on there, town people vote it, the actual law change is approved by town meeting, as will be any expenditures on a go-forward basis. So this is a little bit of a separate program in terms of collection, but in terms of distribution of funds, all the funds are expended only with town meeting approval, the same as any other dollar that's spent by this community. So we're right within their program as well. So our discussions were lively. I want to applaud and thank committee members. We opened the committee, and what we did is we kind of tossed out an idea. We ran around the table. Everybody had a say, and then we had an open ad hoc discussion. And I can firmly say that the support that we come here comes from every committee member. There were some questions that we addressed that might be of interest to you. For example, the 1% versus a higher percentage with exemptions. Again, the idea was to keep it simple. It keeps the discussion of the financing short. Secondly was a matter of timing. Do we wait? Do we wait because of COVID or Omicron? Do we wait in order to just have more time to either collect signatures or to bring it through a separate town meeting process like in the fall? As a committee, we decided no. We wanted to proceed. We wanted to do this now. We wanted to be on the ballot in May. Earlier, I referenced methodology. We had discussions of all various ways, and for the reasons previously stated, the committee has decided to go direct to ballot. The next question that I and the town manager had to the committee members are, will you collect signatures? We have a fair amount of work to do. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and we're off to a great start. And with your approval tonight, we'll begin our work on Thursday. So anybody who is out there listening this evening might be interested in this and wants to help out, 5:30? 5:30 Thursday, right here. Come on down. We'd love to hear from you. We'll do the presentation, get you involved, get a signature, and if you want to do some more work for the committee, we would be happy to include you in that. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank the committee for taking up the charge. The select board truly appreciates the speed and diligence at which you embrace this. You know, having been through it the last time, it's sometimes daunting to get people excited again about something that had, frankly, not gone forward previously, but for many of the reasons that Mr. Powers has outlined. And we thank you for really coming together, offering to pitch in again and help out again. We do appreciate it. I'll start the questions from the board with Select Board Member Duggan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your presentation, Mr. Powers. Appreciate it. I was involved in the effort back in 2016. Huge disappointment that it did not pass. I think your point is of education is a key one, that people really weren't sure what they were voting on. So that's going to be key for May. I support the effort to get this on the local ballot rather than waiting for November. There's a website, preservationcoalition.org, I believe. It's on 6 Beacon Street in Boston. And that's a wealth of information for anyone that wants to learn more about the act and how it works, and specifically about how other communities have used it. And there's close to 200 communities have adopted this act, and there's a database of successful projects that have been completed. It's quite impressive, especially for me personally, for the rail trail type projects. It really made all the difference in a lot of times. I attended your meeting last month, and definitely a committee very enthusiastic, which is a good sign. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the community that were involved back in 16 would be willing to help you out with collecting signatures. That's a lot of work up front, because I think it's a very narrow window to collect those and then get them to the clerk's office. And so time really is of the essence.
Thank you, and yes, our target date is, I believe, March 22nd for getting the signatures, so we have a lot of work to do.
All right, so I look forward to working with your committee, and this is a great way to support the community in a number of different ways. And I think about the train station, and that's, I think if we had this, we might have been able to save the train station. And that, for me, is kind of the driving force of trying this again, this effort. So thank you, and to all the committee members for your dedication and for your enthusiasm, and let's do this. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Select Board Member Bernard.
Great presentation, Mike.
Thank you.
I agree with Select Member Duggan. The basic role, of this is the historic, the open space, the recreation, and the housing. Residents have to look at it like, yeah, we don't want to have a surcharge, but for the 1% to get the return of asset from the state, $331,000. I'm all for it. I think it's great. I love the outreach. I think the education, you've put it out there to really communicate with the residents of Danvers. And I think I would vote for this.
Selectwoman Bennett?
Thank you, Chairman Trask. As part of this committee, we did have discussion on how to do it, when to do it, and how to keep it simple. And the 1% compared to the 1.5% with the deduction, actually the same amount of money and much easier to understand. And as I explained to my wife, when we pay our tax bill, we're going to have an additional $90 to pay next year. And I said, we went out to eat last Friday night. The bill was $84.10. And it's like the state paid the tip of 39% on top of that. So to get 39% on your dollar is tremendous. And yes, it does fluctuate. But the last 4 years, that reimbursement from the state has gone up. And in fact, this past month, which was January, the state had a second round of funding to make it a 43% match in total to the communities. And I looked at the money that Georgetown, Beverly, Peabody, Middleton, Topsfield received, and a lot of it's part of our money because at the Registry of Deeds, there's a fee taken when you record a deed, a municipal lien certificate, whatever. And in Danvers, every year, 300 people buy a house, and they have their deed recorded, and we get no benefit from that. Other communities are getting that benefit. It's time that we got that benefit. And what we're going to do, well, actually, I'll bring you up to date, even though we haven't met yet and you haven't approved it. The Rebecca Nurse Preservation Society, the Danvers Historical Society trustees have both voted to approve this, adopt it, and work for it. And I think the Rebecca Nurse Home will be open Saturday, February 12th to collect signatures. Tapley Hall will be open the 19th and the 26th. I think those are Saturday mornings, 10 to 12. People can come down and sign the ballot and the petition. I'll be speaking to our Kiwanis Club on March 1st and collecting signatures there. And I know I have 4 people that have volunteered to help collect signatures. So I think there will be a big effort, despite the fact that it's cold out there. But that's why we're going to open up Tapley Hall to get people to come out. And the chairman the other Thursday, I'm sure, will have other ideas of where we can go to collect signatures. Of course, we need those ballots. We need that language. So I think that's probably the next step. But we will educate the voters this time where we were unable to do it the last time. So I look forward to everybody supporting the CPA and collecting signatures and signing the petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Select Board Member Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this presentation is as good a presentation as I've seen in my 9 years to this board, Mike. It absolutely convinced me. But beyond that, I think a lot of other people, hopefully, have seen the presentation tonight and will be very willing to buy into what seems to me to be a great program. I also want to compliment my fellow members, Bennett and Duggan, for being so informed, for putting so much of their own life into the study of this, the need for this, and the support of this. So I'm totally in favor, and that part, in part, of course, I think I may have voted against it last time. I'm not sure. I hope I didn't. Well, I think I may have.
It wasn't close, you don't have to worry.
Carla would remember what she kind of keeps track of what I do. I have nothing else, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for asking.
Thank you. Again, a thank you to the committee for their hard work and hopefully upcoming and future hard work as well. A couple of things that struck me that need to be reiterated, because it's going to be easy for the people who are opposed to this to simply say no new taxes. It's an easy banner to get behind. It's an easy slogan to say. And without the education of why the new tax, it's easy for people to, without, as you said, in a vacuum of information, agree, no new taxes. I don't know what this is about, no new taxes. And so those who are going to oppose this for their own reasons, That's going to be their rally cry. We have to be ready to educate the people who want to know why this is being asked. And a couple of important notes. You said it, I know it, the board knows it, the people in the committee know it, because we've lived and breathed it, but sometimes we have to step back and recognize we may be too close to the trees to see the forest. And so there are important things here that need to be, I feel, need to be reiterated in the education process. One is, this money does not go to the general fund. This money is earmarked, it goes to a special fund used only for the purposes that the law allows. We can't use it to augment a fire truck. We can't use it to pay for a new piece of equipment. It's specific to those categories that were identified in the law. The other important thing is that the CPC committee will hear applications, will recommend if there's a competition for funds that year, which should go forward, and it'll be a select board warrant. And as with all warrants, they go through. They go through to town meeting. The select board doesn't make the decision about the warrant. The finance committee doesn't make the decision about whether it goes forward. It goes forward. It may go forward with a certain recommendation, but it's gonna go forward. So the work of the CPC is to get that warrant language, make their recommendation, and then ultimately, 149 town meeting members will make that approval for the expenditure of that money on that specific project. It's not 5 people, it's not 7 people on that committee, it's not 5 people at this board, it's not the members of the finance committee, it's 149 people who make that choice. The other thing, I saw your slide, and it did talk about the average house, and that's the best way to position it for the people who are wondering, what about me? How does it affect me? What it doesn't say there, or it does, but it's kind of obfuscated, is the money that we collect includes commercial and industrial tax money. So it's not just the citizens paying into the fund for redistribution, it's commercial and industrial, and as you know, most of you know, we have higher classification for industrial and commercial. Therefore, they're paying a little bit more per dollar than an average taxpayer. It's important to know that, yes, the big companies and the big real estate holders in town are also paying into this. They benefit from the well-being of the town as well. I have a couple of questions I'll hold on to the end. The other point, you made it, the committee has made it, we're already paying into the system. We are already donating to this as property owners. I had to go to the registry of deeds this year for registering something to do with my land. I paid a portion of that. So we're paying in and not getting back what we're paying in. Other communities are benefiting from the lack of us being members of not being a CPA community. Can't beat a 40% match. There's no investment this town has ever had that gets us 40% return on investment. And it's not just net new projects. You know, it's easy to point to things like we could, the train station or improving the hay barn, but we spend a lot of money annually on maintenance and upkeep that could easily fall into the categories relating to the CPC. For example, we spend a lot of money keeping the library up to snuff. We're going to have to replace the pillars at some point. That's a lot of money. And that can easily be slotted as historic preservation. Same with Town Hall. We spent a lot of money 10, 12 years ago on Town Hall, restoring it, bringing it back to, to what it was historically, because we take pride in the historical fabric of the town. A lot of that, not all of it, can be considered. So we're spending money now that we could benefit with that 40% match. And I don't think it's any mystery or any secret that we dance very close to our levy limit every year, very, very close, and make hard decisions about what we cannot do. And some of those hard decisions about what we cannot do are the very projects we're talking about embracing here. We could not do the hay barn restoration. We could not do the train station. We could not do several. And I don't want to position this as what did we miss, but what can we do? What can we do in the future? There's a lot of money spent at Endicott Park. There's a lot of money spent at Glen Magna. where there's a lot of well-intentioned, hard-working volunteers raising money to restore the tea house. Perfect example of, if we had the opportunity, we could direct their efforts in a manner that moves them away from having to fundraise to actually providing services and providing solutions. Two questions I did have, and by the way, the board has all talked about in terms of we. Just to be really clear, the select board can't take an advocacy position. We can't, as a board, go out and get signatures. We can act individually as members of a committee, as members of a group. Many of us belong to the Kiwanis or other civic and social organizations and can act in that vein. This is not the select board beating the doors for signatures. There's just a distinction there that we have to maintain. Two things. One is, I do note that you put in there a member from the Housing Authority. I would like to ask or consider the Affordable Housing Trust the town has. That group is also tasked with affordable housing opportunities. The Housing Authority is a state agency, and I'm not trying to pit one against the other. It just may be that one of the other appointments goes to that, and it's a consideration for later. The other is, I hope you hit the ground running. And did you have an answer to that, Mr.
I was just going to say,
Manager?
the CPA law requires representation from those 5 committees.
Right. Does it enumerate the state
The Housing
trust?
Authority
Okay.
is a designated seat.
Thank
The
you.
local boards have discretion over how to fill the at-large seats.
Okay.
Yep.
And the other is, I hope you hit the ground running, and you probably have, but do you have crafted language that's been reviewed and approved by town council for your signatures, ready to go, if this were to go forward, so that we don't lose any more time, precious small time?
I would refer the board to the memorandum that accompanied the presentation.
Very good.
On page 2, there is proposed ballot language that Ellen drafted the language, and Dave DeLuca reviewed it on behalf of the committee. So this language is approved by council.
Very good.
For the question itself. And then pages 3 and 4 of that memorandum include language that also reviewed by council that could be used to establish the CPC, which is the standing committee that would receive the applications after this committee is dissolved.
Very good.
So, yes.
And because I care about how much work the town clerk has, she is absolutely willing to accept signatures as they come in. We don't have to wait till the end. If you get a full sheet, I'm sure she'd appreciate the latitude to verify them, not all at once. So I'm excited about this, and thank the committee for its hard work. This is not a public hearing, however. I will entertain public comment if people would want to ask questions to help them set this in their mind, because there's a long road of education ahead, and I don't mind if it starts here tonight. Seeing none, I'll...
Noah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please. I'm sorry.
Nova Semine, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. My question is just with the 1% surcharge, is that, so if that goes into the bylaw, is that something that can be changed if it's really successful and people are like gung-ho, or is this like, it's in that bylaw, that's it? I mean, I know they can be changed, but is this, yeah, that, I guess that's the...
The state statute provides for changes to the program using the same process. I'll defer to the town manager. There are some restrictions as to timing on that, correct? Is that just to end the program?
I think that the law says that once a community has adopted the CPA, it cannot leave in less than 5 years. So once you adopt the CPA, you're in for a minimum of 5 years. I don't know whether that 5-year also impacts the surcharge. That may be a separate section.
Yeah, not with 100% certainty, but I seem to recall that the community did have that. So yes, we do the 1%. We have some tremendous projects. There's a, support for a change to the program. Yeah, we would do this same thing again.
I just want to let you know, I'm Ellen. from the committee, we can also add exemptions. So if we're going forward, all the exemptions for people we could add those exemptions going forward as well. So we could increase the amount, but we could also add exemptions. So.
And just a reminder, your taxes are paid after applying exemptions if you are someone who's capable of using them. There are senior exemptions that can already be adopted that affect your tax bill, but the math is so much easier if you simply say 1% without any additional exemptions relating to the CPA. Just much easier to talk about.
I also believe a number of those exemptions go in prior to the distribution of the bills, correct? So the amount would be net of all of those other
Correct.
non-CPC exemptions. So it stays clean.
Yep.
But everybody still has, nobody's giving anything up in terms of exemptions for everything that's on the books today.
Yes. Is there any
If
other?
I may just point of clarification as well, this is why we didn't want to get into the exemptions. The exemptions apply across the board, okay? It's not an individual. It's not an application where you're looking at an abatement for something. It's a program, and it's consistent across the board with everybody. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Did you have something else, Mr. Duggan?
Yeah, just, do you have a rough idea about how many good signatures we actually need?
1,100 and,
He said, right?
we're shooting for about 13,
Yeah, it's
14.
10%, I think, right, of the base?
I believe, yeah,
5%?
5% of the registered voters, yes.
We have 21,595 voters, according to the town clerk, who has fled the premises at the moment. She did tell me that recently, so it would be 5% of that, which I think is around 1,080.
I don't have any of my math students here, so we'll have to estimate.
Okay, all right,
Again,
thank
the
you.
education's going to happen, so this is a precursor for the committee to hear what questions may come up. If there are other questions, we entertain them. Please, Mr. Bradstreet.
Bill Bradstreet, town meeting member, precinct 1. The percentage on the tax bill, that doesn't preclude someone from offering extra money if they feel so inclined, making a donation per se above the percentage.
That's a question I'm not sure anybody has investigated. I'm seeing quizzical looks from the committee. It would be a gift to the town, and then it would go to the general fund, unfortunately. Gifts to the town go to the general fund.
Yeah.
Let us find out for you. Let us work on it.
I'm sure there are some people who would like to give more than just that percentage on their tax bill. They might feel so inclined. Instead of buying a carton of cigarettes, they might donate that money, whatever. It's just the idea that you can
Tell me
make.
where I can get 40% return on my money. I'm going to go right there.
Irrespective of the 40%, individuals wanting to can always make a gift to the town and designate that gift. So the question as to whether we get the 40% return would be a separate question, but certainly they could make that contribution.
We'll find out for you, Mr. Bradstreet. Thank you for the question.
Can I just say something, too?
Yes.
You know, folks, this is really good. Committee, you've done a great job. Mr. Bennett and I see it all the time with our real estate. We see it in tax bills. So there's so many communities that are doing that. Let's get this through if we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, anything else? Audience members, anything else?
Good.
Mr. Mills?
It's conceivable that the fund maintained by the state will increase as real estate values increase, because I believe that the registry funds that are collected are based upon the value of property. So I'm just saying there may be a built-in inflation factor in the state's fund portion of this that is going to go higher rather than lower. Just a thought.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. In addition, with over 200 or approaching 200 communities in the program right now, as individual legislators, they have incentive to further support the program, which the legislator has done, and in fact, they did that on the supplemental this year, increasing from 40 to 43%. So this is not a program that lies outside the mainstream. In fact, the majority of the cities and towns are already participating in this. So that gives us good political leverage to sustain and perhaps even increase in good years the contribution through the state legislature above and beyond the registry fees, which has happened every year.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
To answer Mr. Mills's question, a couple of years ago, the state raised the fees at the registry from $20 and $10 to $50 to record a deed, $20 for a municipal lien certificate, raising the funds they collected from $23 million, I'll round them off, to $69 million that goes into this fund. And the legislature has put in additional funding, second rounds of funding the last 4 years. Whatever that number is going forwards, we don't know. But it's a fixed rate at the registry of deeds. So buy a house, sell a house, contribute to the registry of deeds, and we'll get the benefit.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate the work of the committee, and now the select board is going to make a decision. Do we take a motion on moving this forward?
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion. Who would like to make that?
I'll make,
I'll make the motion that we move this forwards and have the CPA committee get out there and collect 1,300 signatures, please.
and I will second it.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any more discussion on the board? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, thank you. Good luck.
Good luck.
And
If I
we'll
could,
pitch in if
Mr.
we
Chairman,
can.
just one more quick commercial. 5:30 Thursday night here. For anybody that's interested in helping out, we'd love to see you and give you everything you need. Thank you.
Or stop by and sign, too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time, the board will hear a fiscal 2021 audit report by the town's independent auditor. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
That was exciting. Maybe next year you'll have more to audit.
So my name is Zach Fentros. I am the audit manager in charge of the Town of Danvers June 31st, 2021 annual comprehensive report. I'm with Melanson CPAs, and tonight I'm going to go over the financial statements. I'm going to highlight some certain account balances and some trends. But before I kind of dive into the financial statements, I think what's important is to kind of have a takeaway from my presentation here tonight. And I think the takeaway from the presentation is that the town is in a good financial position. The town has a good unassigned fund balance. The town does make annual commitments to begin funding your OPEB liability with your OPEB trust fund. The town had positive turnbacks on both the revenues and expenses on your general fund budgetary versus actual results. And the town had no management letter. And I'll get into the town no management letter towards the end of my presentation in a bit more detail. But if I could, I'd like to have you turn to page 13 of the financial statements.
I'm looking at our finance director while I make this statement, but I believe this is posted to the website. Maybe not. Then disregard my comment. It will be tomorrow morning.
Well, you've already answered two of my questions. Where's the management letter and is this posted? So.
There you go.
So page 13 is the first page of the independent auditor's report. This is what we were hired to produce for the town of Danvers. The town received a clean opinion. This is the best opinion you can receive from an independent auditor, and it's the same opinion that the town of Danvers has received in prior audits. Next, if I could have you turn to page 16. And page 16 is the first page of the management's discussion and analysis, and this takes place on pages 16 through 25. And this is essentially a narrative summary of the results of operation. This section also discusses any major financial areas. So instead of just simply sitting here and reading this to you, I'd actually like to jump right into the first page of what I'll call the number pages, which is page 28, which is a statement and deposition, where we'll start discussing the same things on page 28 and some further pages that are discussed here in the management's discussion and analysis. So on page 28, you'll see that there are three columns. There are your governmental activities, your business type activities, and the total. What makes up your governmental activities is your general fund, your stabilization fund, your capital project funds, your special revenue funds, your permanent trust funds, and your internal service funds. And then what makes up your business type activities is your water fund, your sewer fund, and your electric enterprise fund. And a breakdown between those three can actually be found on page 37. I don't want to jump to page 37. I'd actually like to focus just our attention on page 28 for the time being. So tonight I'm going to go over two balance sheets. The first one is page 28, and page 28 takes a long-term financial view of the financial statements. And then on a further page, we're going to talk about the short-term view of the financial statements. So the first item I'd like to bring to your attention on page 20, I want to focus on that very first column, that governmental activities. About a third of the way down the page, you'll see an item called non-depreciable capital assets. And that non-depreciable capital assets actually has a balance of $67,892,000. My handwriting's a little small here, which is actually an increase of about $23 or $24 million from the prior year. Now, that increase is primarily due to the completion or the work that's been done on the Smith School project. So that's why you see that large increase in that balance this year is due to that work that's been done on the Smith School project. Right below that, you'll see that there are other capital assets net of accumulated depreciation. And that has a balance of $107 million. This is actually a decrease of about $5 million, or about $6.2 million from the prior, or $5 million from the prior year. Now that decrease is due to depreciation expense in the current year of about $6.2 million on your depreciable assets. And that was softened by about $972,000 on various vehicles and equipment that were added to your capital assets in fiscal year 21. I want to jump into the liabilities next, but before I do, there is an item that's 2 line items right above your capital assets that is new to the town of Danvers this year. It's called net pension asset. And you'll see for governmental activities it does not have a balance, but it actually has a balance of about 2.9 or about $3 million under your business type activities. Now this is due in part to, or really not in part, it is due to the electric division funding their proportional share of that net pension liability in excess of what was required. So it shows a net pension asset of your business type activities of about $3 million. But on page 37, you'll see that, they don't want you to go there right now, but you'll see that the water fund actually has a liability of about $3 million. The sewer fund has a liability of about $500,000. But the electric enterprise fund actually has an asset of about $6.7 million. For the presentation on page 28, those need to be combined and shown as a net figure. So that's going to actually be in relation to your non-current liabilities. If you go maybe about 2/3 of the way down the page, you'll see a line item under non-current liabilities called the net pension liability. And that has a balance of $75,777,000. So if you look at the net pension liability for your governmental activities, plus the asset for your business type activities, and in total, this actually was about a $5.4 million decrease from the prior year. Now that decrease in this total liability is primarily due to the investment results for the retirement system for December 31st, 2020. Those investment results exceeded what was expected and what was anticipated. And due to that, the liability came down to those positive investment results. Again, that's what exceeded what was expected by the retirement system for their calendar year end, December 31st, 2020. Right below that, you'll see that there is a net OPEB liability, and that's of a balance of about $209 million. Now, what this represents is, and what OPEB represents is your other post-employment benefits, which is essentially the health insurance. This is a figure that is actuarially determined by an actuary that is independently hired by the town of Danvers. And it really represents the future health insurance associated with the payments for the town of Danvers for your current retirees plus your active employees. And what's important to note is that the town has begun to fund this liability. And the town is actually funding this liability of about 4.4% of the total liability has been funded. Now, I know that 4.4% does not sound like a large funding figure, and it's not, but the majority of the communities in the Commonwealth didn't start funding this liability until fairly recently. So on average, for the cities and towns in the Commonwealth, we see anywhere between 0 and 10% funding for this liability. So the town of Danvers at 4.4%, you're kind of close into the middle, maybe a little bit above average for funding this liability compared to your other communities in the Commonwealth. And the town does make an annual contribution to your OPEB trust fund, and that will be viewed favorably by your users of the financial statements, such as your bond rating, your bond raters, or other users of the financial statements. They like to see a commitment to fund that liability. The town of Danvers has done that on an annual basis. If I could have you next turn to page 32. In page 32 is your governmental funds balance sheet. So I said tonight I will go over 2 balance sheets. The first one, again, is a long-term financial view of the town of Danvers. And on page 32 is the short-term financial view for the town of Danvers. You have 4 columns here. You have your general fund, which is your general fund plus your stabilization funds. You have your major capital project fund, and then you have your non-major governmental funds, which is your permanent trust funds, and your special revenue funds are all consolidated and presented there as non-major governmental funds. For tonight, I actually just want to focus on just that very first column, that general column. And the number I actually want to bring to your attention is actually 3 numbers from the bottom, and that's your unassigned fund balance. And as of June 30, 2021, that had a balance of $13,729,000. This is actually about a $2.6 million increase from the prior year. And I'll get into what that increase really represents and why that was an increase in that figure in a moment. But this really is one of the more important figures in your financial statements because it's really the starting point for the free cash calculation for the town. And then in the Government Finance Officers Association, or the GFOA, likes to see this figure between 8 and 16% compared to the town's current year budget. And as of June 30, 2021, the comparison to the town's budget was about 12.9%. So that's a good financial position for the town of Danvers to be in, and again, will be viewed favorably by your users of the financial statements, such as your bond rating agencies. So I said that this was an increase of about $2.6 million from the prior year. Now, that increase is primarily due to your budgetary versus actual results for the general fund. So in the current year, the town actually had turnbacks, and we'll get to that here in a minute where we can see those turnbacks. But the town had turnbacks on your budgetary versus actual of about $5.2 million. So the town brought back in about $5.2 million to your unassigned fund balance, but then during the FY22 budgeting process, the town used $3 million of your unassigned fund balance. So that fund balance increased by about 5.2, and then the town used $3 million of that for next year's budgeting process, which kind of leads to that $2.6 million increase that you see in the unassigned fund balance. If I could have you turn to page 36. Page 36 is your general fund budgetary versus actual results. So there are 4 columns here. You have your original budget, you have your final budget. That third column is your actual revenues or your actual expenses. And then that far right column, which is where I'd like to pay our attention here tonight, is your favorable or unfavorable variance when comparing that final budget to your actual amounts. And if you look about a third of the way down the page, you'll see total revenues. And that had a favorable variance of $1,584,000. This represents the amount of revenues that came in greater than what the town of Danvers anticipated for fiscal year 21, which is, again, a good financial position for the town of Danvers to be in. Likewise, about 2/3 of the way down the page, you'll see total expenditures. And total expenditures came in less than what was anticipated by the town by $3,660,000. So again, this is a favorable turnback for the town of Danvers that represents the amount of expenditures that came in less than what was anticipated. So you see at that very last number on the far right-hand side, the town had overall turnbacks of about $5.2 million on your budgetary versus actual results, which again is going to be viewed favorably by your users of the financial statements. And that was everything I really wanted to bring to your attention in the financial statements here tonight. They were fairly comparable to the prior year. I just highlighted some of the bigger swings and some of the newer items this year. So again, just the takeaway is that the town is in a good financial position. The town does have a good unassigned fund balance that's right in line with where the GFOA would recommend that it would be. The town did annual contributions to your OPEB trust fund and also had turnbacks on your budgetary versus actual. And I did talk about there not being a management letter at the beginning of my presentation, and I'll maybe follow up on that here now. So in addition to proving out the numbers in your financial statements, we also look at the town's internal controls to make sure that your assets are being appropriately safeguarded. And if any of the internal controls weren't operating effectively or needed significant improvement, we would recommend those improvements in a formal management letter. During our audit this year, we didn't come across anything that warranted an inclusion of a formal management letter. We certainly did have some recommendations on some small improvements, and we did sit down. We had meetings with both Rodney and then Rodney and Steve, where we verbally recommended those to both Rodney and Steve, and they've shown in the past a commitment to making those verbal recommendations. Again, nothing was serious enough to lead to a formal management letter. There were rather some small housekeeping items. So that's why there was no management letter this year. And I think that really speaks to how seriously the town takes your internal controls to ensure that your assets are being appropriately safeguarded. And Mr. Chair, I think at this point I'd like to open up to any questions, comments, or concerns.
Quick question about the management letter while we're on that subject.
Sure.
I think it's a great thing. Thank you for explaining it. In the industry, when we get reviewed by Standard & Poor's and other rating agencies, will they recognize the lack of a management letter as a positive thing?
Yes, they will. And they certainly do note in their reports about the management's commitment to internal controls and their overall, ethical backing, if you will.
Okay, so the omission is actually a good thing.
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. I'll open it up now to Select Board Member Bernard, if you'd like to start.
No questions. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Select Board Member Bennett?
Thank you. Well, very interesting that the turnbacks were what they were and that our free cash is in good shape and that the management, top to bottom, is doing a good job. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Select Board Member Mills?
I don't want to embarrass myself by asking a question about what I don't know anything about. But I'm impressed with the quality of the presentation, and I have full confidence in our people and in our management. So I'm not surprised that things look good for us, because we have a great management team. And I did understand what you were saying tonight, and I think it was very well presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Select Board Member Duggan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could just spend a minute on page 36, the last sheet that you had
Sure.
run through. So when we look at the first two columns, the budgeted amounts, those are projections?
No, that's as it was voted at the annual town meeting. So
Okay.
at the annual town meeting, the town develops a budget where they say revenues are going to be this, expenditures will be this, and that's what per the vote, and that's what's reflected here under the original budget. If there's any special town meetings or supplemental budget appropriations, that's what you'll see on the final budget.
Okay. So I'm just kind of thinking back to the spring of 2020, which is when a lot of these figures came to light, I believe. And if we think about that, it seems like a long time ago, but that was at the beginning of the pandemic. We knew that the state was billions of dollars with generating lack of revenue, right? Because the economy basically was shut down. People weren't working, so there was no income tax being collected and stuff. So we really didn't know what the impact was going to be for our cherry sheets. And so at the time, I think many of us thought that we were in dire straits, that depending on how long that existed, that situation, that type of environment, we were fortunate it didn't last as long as we thought it or could have. But it seems like we kind of were conservative enough, so even if we had a significant reduction in revenue such as meals and hotel taxes and even property taxes, it seems like at the end of the day, when I look at column 4 with the variances, the variances look small to me. So I think, does that speak highly of our finance department, that they have that they just didn't pick numbers out of the air and they kind of did their homework and did some realistic type projections?
As much as I'm sure you'd love to praise me, I'll jump in and take that. To your point, I mean, obviously the pandemic threw our budget for a loop. Never in my career have I had to do essentially 3 revenue budgets. We did the one in March that we had to pull back as the pandemic hit full force. We had the one in June that we used to pass our budget at town meeting. And then in December, when we did the recap, we had to readjust those numbers the 3rd time. So again, I think in each iteration, we brought our estimates down. Just again, as we saw, we had no way to predict the impact on meals and hotels. And in some cases, meals we did a little bit better. Hotels, actually, we probably should have brought it down more. So I think, again, we erred severely on the side of caution, and that benefited in the end result in our financial statement.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that information. I just in closing, I think it just, these financial statements, I think they just speak highly of how well the town is run. We kind of take it for granted almost, but I think if you open up the hood, you can see there's a lot of work that goes into it. So thank you for the presentation, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Been doing this 16 years, and my favorite section of this report every year, I usually look forward to the management letter because it's usually something to hold up and say, see, not too much to talk about. There's obviously every system has an opportunity for improvement someplace.
Sure.
And we've never had a management letter that says we're glaringly wrong in anything in the years past. Not having one is new, but as you explained, it's actually a beneficial thing. My favorite section of this whole book starts on page 127, and it is a fantastic summary of the town. Not only of the town finances trending over the past 10 years, but also demographic information, operating information about the town. I actually, when we're done, I take this out, staple it together, and keep it separately, because I'm not going to lug this whole thing around with me all the time. To Mr. Duggan's point, and I'll say this. The town does a fantastic job at projection. We often hear from our taxpayers, who obviously, no one wants to pay taxes, I get it. But the question is your value on a return for the tax that you pay. And they say, well, why is it so high? Why can't we zero fund? Why can't we do this? Why they brainstorm, and they try to equate it to their home budget or even a business budget. And looking at these numbers on page 36 and the variances that we have, I would challenge any household to sit down on January 1st and map out their entire year's worth of expenses, their entire year worth of revenues, even projecting they might get a raise in their job or a cost of living increase if they're on a pension. All of the expenses they can even conceive of for the upcoming year, and come within 1.5% of revenue projections and 3.5% of the liabilities they're going to face. This is the same thing in your household. You don't know when your car's going to break down. You don't know when the water heater's going to go. You don't know when you're going to need a plumber or a filling falls out. You make your best guess. The town has a lot of really intelligent people relying on a lot of history who get this down to 1.5% projections on revenues and 3.5 on expenditures. And often these expenditures are things that are out of our control. A project may not start on time because of supply. We can't control that. We all know that during the pandemic and the aftermath of the major wave, couldn't get steel, couldn't get certain supplies. So some of this 3.5%, some of this $3.7 million that was not spent, anticipated to be spent, is often just projects deferred. So if you put it in that context, I would defy any homeowner, any person looking at their own personal finance and budget to meet these tolerances and think that Danvers does a fantastic job of projecting revenue and projecting expenses and comes very close. And someone's going to take this $5.2 million worth of free cash and run with it like we've overtaxed by $5 million, and that's just not the case. This is money that will go back to the general fund, will be reallocated in next year to defray costs for the following year. So I thank you for affirming what we, I think, as the board already understand and know, and put in real concrete numbers just how small our tolerance for discretion is in a $1 million budget. $100 million budget, 1.107 this year. So I appreciate the diligence, and the other thing that, again, because we've been here so long and appreciate your efforts, is this is not the town telling the town how well it did. This is a completely independent audit by industry experts who do this for every city and town in the Commonwealth. Or audits happen for every city and town. I don't mean your business does it, but by law, this should affirm to the citizens of Danvers that our books are sound and accurate and literally to the dollar, exactly what we spent and what we took in. So I thank you for affirming that for us.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Town Manager, you have some comments?
I would just thank Zach for a great presentation, and although we will be acknowledging them shortly, I would also acknowledge the three other members of Rodney's finance team in the back of the room. Jill Summit, our treasurer collector, Heather Varney, our town accountant, and hiding way back in the corner is John Lavelle, our chief assessor. And their three offices contribute all throughout the CAFR that you received on Friday. And so we are fortunate. I echo what's been said. We have a strong finance team, and they do a really good job staying in constant contact. And I should also acknowledge Mr. Taverna and Noel Bach, because we can't have a a clean audit without their participation as well. So very fortunate.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the board? Thank you very much. We appreciate it as always.
Mr. Chair, if it would be okay, I'd kind of make a quick statement, thank you.
Absolutely.
Just to kind of reiterate what Steve Bertha was saying there, you know, this is not a small undertaking. This is a 143-page report, and it is due by December 31st because the town does submit it to a review process. So it really helps that, you know, as Steve was saying, that Rodney, Heather, Jill, and others here that were involved in the process were very well prepared, had the records in good, clean order, and then when we come, I like to say that we shut the town down for a week and a half, 2 weeks, because we're constantly in one of their offices asking them questions and asking for support. So they do work very hard to make sure that this document is done on time, and we appreciate everything that they did in helping us to produce this document and making sure that it was ready for submission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will move on to the next agenda item. The Finance Director will discuss the FY22 second quarter revenue and expenditure report.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. In front of you this evening, you have the Quarter 2 update for fiscal year '22. I'll run through some of the highlights. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. It's in the standard format that we submit to the board with revenue on top and then expenditures. It's in the similar form as you'll see in your budgets each year under the revenue and expenditure detail. First is real estate taxes and personal property are as expected. Motor vehicle, we just had our commitment, we just received our commitment one for FY22. So again, the bulk of excise taxes issued in February. So as you'll see, that revenue number is significantly lower, and that's just because we collect a majority of that money over the next 2 months. But early signs are that that'll be a good number for '22. So looking at some of the categories we mentioned as impacted by the pandemic, here we see hotel, motel finally coming back after a 2-year dip. Meals as well, which is good not just for our '22 results, which will be coming up, but also as we look at the '23 budget process, knowing that, knock on wood, these categories are starting to rebound. Looking down, dropping all the way down to license and permits. Here again, we'll see a very favorable number, in large part due to building permits. It's already at 500,000, which was our estimate for the full year for '22. So again, that's a positive as well. Some of the smaller line items that are coming up a little bit shorter than expected. One is the fine and forfeitures. The other is the investment income. For this one, Treasurer Collector Jill Summit pulled some data together because, again, we saw this number come down in '21, and it looks like it's coming down even further in '22. For a comparison, we made $440,000 in revenue just a couple of years back. And if you look at the investment rate for 2 years ago when we generated $440,000 and the average investment rate we're earning now, it's dropped 90%. And so as a result, you can expect that the revenue would also drop 90%. We're still actively investigating and seeing if we can move the money, but again, it's across the board. Interest rates are down, which helps us when we go out and borrow $10 million for the Smith School project. It hurts us when we're parking our money in banks and only earning, 0.4%. So it's something to monitor as we look at the FY23 budget process, and it's something that the treasurer is monitoring on a monthly basis as far as seeing how we can maximize that return. And then again, nothing else jumped out significantly. If there's anything particular on the revenue side that you had a question on, I'm happy to answer it.
So anything above 50% is trending higher than anticipated.
Correct.
And obviously, we can't predict these numbers will increase by the same amount through the end of the year.
No, and some of them usually, by the way that they're collected, they peak early on. Hotel, motel is one of them. Just by the lag, and again, I would assume probably the way people plan vacations over the summer, we get the money in the fall and the early winter. So these are usually the 2 highest quarters, and then it dips a little bit for quarters 3 and 4. So some of it is the timing, so even though it may be 50%, 60%, 70%, that's why we try to put a note on the side letting you know just historically where we view that as far as a normal trend.
And in lieu of taxes is trending a little low. Is that just, again, a timing issue, we think?
Yeah, again, that's
collections
a timing thing, so some of that is routine collections, such as our contribution from the electric division, but some of our other pilot letters will go out next month. So when we look at some of the nonprofits that contribute a pilot payment, they'll get that letter in the coming month. So again, that's a timing issue.
I jumped ahead. I'll start with Select Board Member Bennett. You have
No
questions,
questions.
sir? Select Board Member Mills?
Nothing, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Select Board Member Duggan?
Just one question, Mr. Connell. The last line under revenue, the state receipts, does that, at 51%, that's just a little bit, a nudge higher than what is expected?
Yeah, and that could be most of the major receipts we receive monthly, some are quarterly, so that could be throwing off.
Okay.
The others, some are variable, like our charter reimbursement can be impacted, even though we set our budget, that may be impacted by October enrollment, so that number might have changed.
Well, that's a considerable amount, so I'm sure you keep a close eye on that. So, all right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Select Board Member Bernard?
Rodney, just the investment income, we talked about that before, so I know we're watching that. What's the other department revenue? What's that?
So that essentially is just our catch, the other department is just a catch-all for various smaller receipts. If we have a department that takes in revenue for something that we're not, we don't have a set it's not a fee necessarily, it's not a permit, it's sort of a catch-all category.
Okay. And the fees, what are the fees comprised of?
So that is a variety of fees, and I apologize, I don't have my list here.
Roughly?
It's different fees for services that we charge, so, for example.
Like the recording fee?
Exactly,
Like the
stuff like
clerk's
that, yeah,
fees and things like that?
exactly.
Okay. All right, that's it?
Fines and forfeitures, I actually, I would presume that's kind of a blessing in disguise. I mean, is it that there aren't as many fines and forfeitures coming in, or that our receipt of those is behind?
So the fine and forfeiture is the DOR term. Here in Danvers, it's really just court fines that goes into that category. So I would presume that with remote court sessions and stuff like that, that contributed to the drop, but yeah, that is literally just that line item.
In effect, it's a beneficial. You could say crime's down, courts are down, fines are down,
Exactly.
therefore. I have no other questions. Thank you very much, board members. Any other questions? Mr. Manager, is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Only, that was the revenue section. If we can spin through the expenditure side of the ledger and then move on to our third financial topic of the evening.
All right.
So here, most of the categories are as expected. A couple of things to point out. Finance Committee met last month to transfer $75,000 into the technology warrant as part of a regional initiative. On the public safety side, fire overtime is at 81%. Again, that'll probably require a transfer at some point. First, we'll use any available surplus and vacancies in the fire permanent line, and then we'll look for potential other transfers. Snow and ice, when I typed this on Friday, it was largely unspent.
I'll report, I'll give you an update on that later.
That will be it, hopefully.
So, as you can imagine, we spent a little bit this weekend. The other ones that you'll see that are almost fully expended, that's just the nature of the billing, so debt service is fully expended. Retirement, we make our payment right away the first week in July of the fiscal year, so that's why that's fully expended. Employee benefits, again, that's timing of certain charges. Again, so that's not low, it's just a timing mechanism.
What is our state assessments expenditure? What do we
So
pay the state?
those are the bad side of the cherry sheet. So the good side of the cherry sheet is our Chapter 70 educational aid, our unrestricted aid. The cherry assessment side would be payment to a charter or school choice, funding for the MBTA, mosquito program, a variety of other smaller items, but yeah.
Board members, I'll just open it up. Anybody have any questions on expenditures?
Yeah, I have one.
Mr. Duggan?
Can we just do a deeper dive on the Essex Tech? The difference between the FY '22 budget and then the actual?
So again, that's just the timing of how they're billing us, so the way it's set up in statute, it's not 4 evenly divided payments. There's a significant payment, I believe it's quarter 2.
But
Quarter
we're
2 is
still,
significant, yeah.
we're still on target for the
So,
actual
yeah.
budgeted amount?
So their final budget matches that 3.399 million.
Okay, all right, that's all I have, thank you.
Any other members, questions about expenditures? Any questions whatsoever on the report?
No, that's it.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you, team, for, this is the second of 3 finance-related topics, and now we will move to the Finance Director will conduct the FY '22 Financial Summit. Mr. Town Manager, do you want to tee up the ball for us?
Yeah, I'll do the easy part before Rodney has to do the heavy lifting and the slog through the actual metrics and figures. But to kick it off, I'll note this is our 6th financial summit. This was instituted back in 2016, and it's a practice that it gives the boards an opportunity to step back and look at. We just went through the annual audit, which drills very deeply into our operating results from a very specific year. This presentation is a chance to look at sort of a 10-year trend, and then have a conversation about what those trends mean moving forward. And each year, we designate the wrap-up section of this to have a conversation about a topic that may be timely given where we are in terms of project development, or in this case, the strategic plan will be something that we can spend a couple minutes talking about at the end. So this is something that, we're taking a look at the financial condition of the town. This is something that, as Zach mentioned before he left, the rating agencies like to see that towns are being thoughtful about their financial management and trying to understand not just the end results, but the process that leads to those. And it's a chance to kind of step out of the budget and focus on the bigger picture. So most of that is summarized right here. Some of the highlights from the current year. We maintained our AAA rating with Standard & Poor's. Rodney, Heather, and the teams have done an excellent job managing very complex and ever-changing rules related to the CARES Act and FEMA, and now ARPA, in terms of response to the pandemic and a lot of costs that the town absorbed. Responding to that, some of which is reimbursable, and all of which requires documentation, which the team has done a terrific job on. Part of the importance of maintaining the credit rating is that as opportunities come up to restructure our debt, we want to be able to capitalize. We work closely with Hilltop, our financial advisor. Rodney works closely with the team there, and we were able to restructure some existing debt this year and save $6 million in future debt costs that won't show up as a budget saving, but over the life of those bonds, we will have avoided $6 million in interest costs on those. And as we just discussed a few minutes ago, through 3 iterations of the budget last spring, we were able to bring the budget to a close in a positive position, which was not something that any of us would have been able to predict with absolute certainty a year and a half ago. So those are a few of the highlights from the year. And I already introduced the team, so I won't do that again. And I think my notes say I'm supposed to turn it over to Rodney at this point, so I guess I have to turn it over to Rodney. I'd like to keep talking, but I'm going to stop there and let Rodney have a go. Thank you.
As the manager mentioned, we have our treasurer collector, Jill Summit, John LaBella, chief assessor, and town accountant, Heather Barney, with us to answer any of the questions that come up. Starting with the population estimates, so a couple of these slides, as you'll see, involve comparison per capita, and to do that, we needed population estimates. Unfortunately, the town census doesn't have a 100% response rate, so historically we use the census along with the census's ACS survey in order to get our population estimates. So what you see here is just an update on where the numbers come from. So we use the 5-year rolling American Community Survey for the years in between the census. 2020, we have our fresh census number. And then 21, as we have done in recent years, we use a 5-year average to project the increase for 21.
And before you move off the slide, I have a note here. It's really important to note, you see, if you're watching from home, you see 5% at the bottom. It's not 5%, it's half of 1% going forward, which is, we often hear citizens lament how big the town is growing, how large it is, how many populations exploding. Our population on average is going up 166 people a year. for the past 10 years. That's not as high as the population growth. So trying to put it in context, that's half of 1%. Thank you.
And then as we talk about, there's really four measures of financial condition we look at when we examine some of these trends. First, cash and budgetary, the first two. We need to maintain cash flow in order to pay our bills. We also are statutorily required to adopt a balanced budget each year. The third category, long-run solvency. Here we look at our liabilities that require long-term planning. These include pension, OPEB, debt, all which we'll hit on later on in the presentation. And then service level solvency. Are we able to continue to provide the level of service residents want and expect? So our team can manage cash flow. We can provide the board with a balanced budget to review within the resources available, and we can try to develop some long-range plans. Fourth measure is really driven by the stakeholders, such as yourselves and those in attendance. And that goes in part to what we'll talk about in the last section tonight on our long-term strategic planning. In terms of the financial indicators, similar to prior years, there's 13 areas of focus. On the revenue side, we have revenue per capita, and then our three major revenue sources, property tax, state aid, local receipts. We'll also look at economic growth. On the expenditure side, expenditures per capita, salary and wages and benefits as percents of our total spend. We'll look at our reserves, free cash, our stabilization funds, as well as our unassigned fund balance, which Zach talked about a little bit earlier this evening. And then lastly, the liabilities, which we mentioned, pension, other post-employment benefits, and debt service. And for a variety of these, we'll have benchmarks as well to compare to. Our benchmarks remain the same as we had last year. It's a combination of trying to look at communities that are near us, like your Salem, Beverly, and Peabody, and then communities that have a similar makeup, whether it's the grand list or population, again, so then you'll see communities like Stoneham, Wakefield. No list of benchmarks is perfect, but I think this captures a little bit of communities that are both similar and communities that are in our geographical location. But this is something we look at every year, and we'll continue to see if any updates need to be made. Starting with revenue, and you should have, and this will all be posted online tomorrow, but you should have an accompanying document that gives you some of the breakout of the data. This year we try to clean up the presentation a little bit and show the graph, and on the side give you the data to match the numbers. That way it's a little bit easier to track, hopefully.
Ray, can I jump in for 1 second
Sure.
here? So the board received a memorandum that follows the presentation, and I believe on the chair next to Mr. Daly, there were a handful of reports that also track the presentation. So if anybody wants to have a copy of the report, which has some of the narratives, there should be some over in this corner of the room.
The accompanying document doesn't have slide numbers, but we are going in order, so we won't jump around too much, I promise. First category is revenue per capita. And here if you look at back to, and this is adjusted for inflation. If you look back to 2012 to 2021, when adjusted for inflation, over that 10-year period, the actual revenue has only gone up 6%. So again, it's a stable outlook for now, but as you can see for the number, it's really treading water, and that's despite some work we've done on fixed costs, such as, again, refinancing some debt, taking a look at our healthcare plan. So despite some major moves to create some budget flexibility, we still see that revenue is going up less than 2.5% when adjusted for inflation.
So we don't have to play catch up at the end. I'm going to invite the board members to jump in on any of these slides and ask the questions as we're in the context of the slides. So please feel free to jump in. Don't wait for me to recognize. Hearing none.
Also on the revenue per capita, we have a comparison, a pie chart of where the revenue sources come from. Again, this is just using our three major sources, which are property tax, state aid, and local receipts. You won't see here one-time revenue, for example, us using the debt stabilization fund, because again, that's existing funds that we already have that we're appropriating to phase in debt related to the Smith School project. If you look at the chart year over year, you see not much changing, except you do see, if you dig in a little bit deeper, you can see the local receipts was at 15% in 2012, That's really a misnomer, and I would love to have changed the comparison year, but we do call it a 10-year look back, so we have to use 2012. But that local receipts has a couple one-time contributions. One was a premium sale for over $1 million back in 2012. So it was a bond sale, we generated a premium, we took it as local receipt. State legislator has since said that that's not allowable, so we don't do that anymore. And then the other category, we had an electric rant for $700,000. So despite that, the charts are pretty even, but if you were to phase out those one-time expenses, it really is, our revenue sources are pretty similar over these 10-year period. Now to dig in a little bit deeper on the specific revenue categories, here we see our property tax revenue. Again, this one is adjusted for inflation. It's been a long-standing practice of Danvers to provide level services without the use of a Prop 2.5 override or debt exclusion. We rate this stable, but again, much like overall revenue, it's critical for the long-term health of Danvers to manage expenditures within these constraints of Proposition 2.5. This obviously becomes difficult, and we'll talk about it later, when some of those fixed costs outpace 2.5%. In terms of the collection rate on this property tax revenue, the town has had a strong collection rate for several years now. It ticked up during the pandemic, but again, it was still a roughly 97% collection rate. It's also worth noting that these funds don't go away. So we have the ability to lien on unpaid tax bills. So again, if you'll notice in some of our revenue reports, and if you look at the financial statements, we assume that revenue will be collected, so it's a deferred revenue. Unlike local receipts that when the year passes, that's our last chance to collect on different fees and permits, et cetera.
Here's a question, please.
Sure.
So we're at the levy limit most years, but I see we're highly dependent on the new growth, which is a fluctuating figure. Sometimes it's more than $1 million, and sometimes it's half of that. So that doesn't really bode well for trying to create projections into the future. Is there some way that we can better control the new growth in terms of, or is that just we're at the whim of the marketplace?
We're not necessarily at the whim, and it's probably, actually, we have a couple slides on new growth, and I think in our strategic planning section at the end, we'll dig
Okay,
a little
that's
bit
fine.
deeper.
All right, I can wait. Thank you.
But to your point, yeah, it's a combination of both, combination of the market and then tools that we can use to try to incentivize new growth. But yeah, that is, other than 2.5, new growth is the other factor that we're able to include. Okay. We historically budget that conservatively at $600,000. It's been that number for many, many years, except for the one year we went up to 650, and that was the year that we did not hit it. So we went back to 600, and we'll remain there for the foreseeable future. So. Okay.
Technically, we hit 6. We hit, I think it was 629,000. So we were short 21, but we would have still been over our steady Eddie. So.
Next, we look at our comparison communities. This is for fiscal year 20. Most of the data you'll see, some will be as recent as 22, such as the average tax bill, but some of the more intensive ones like FY20, you'll see for this benchmark and others, that's just a factor of they're still filing their 21 reports. So we saw our report tonight. Some communities still haven't completed their 21 financials, so we want to make sure that we can use everyone as our benchmark, so we use 20 for a lot of these. In terms of taxes as percentage total revenue, Danvers is pretty middle, and it's a pretty steady number across the comparative communities. As you get into some of the gateway cities and the state average, you'll see that go lower, 71% for the state average, and then Salem at 64%. But for a lot of our communities, we're right in line as far as the makeup of property taxes as total revenue. Here we have our average single-family tax bill. On the lower half of this chart, again at 6933. And then assessed values by class, as it has been in recent years. We're second on the list behind Burlington in terms of commercial making up a percentage of the total valuation. Any comments?
I would add some context here. In the statistical section of the audit, you can see the relative changes in our grand list over the past decade or so. One of the things I noted during the audit presentation is that the residential portion of our grand list has increased by about 48% in value over the past 10 years. The commercial industrial has also grown. It's grown by 21%. So it's a little misleading. In a residential market like we've experienced in the past decade, residential values have been increasing at 2 times the rate of commercial, so that in and of itself will impact what portion of your grand list is commercial versus residential. And additionally, through zoning, you can also influence the way that the relationship between residential and commercial play out. For example, when we rezoned the downtown, a lot of the industrial parcels were modified to allow for residential because there is a demand not only in Danvers but in the region for folks who want to be able to live near downtown. So that's the town saying we're going to shift our parcels from commercial to residential. So that's intentional. And then we also look at making sure that we unlock and properly zone some of our legacy districts. So David Fields and his team are looking at Endicott Street, Liberty Tree Mall, the hospitals, Cherry Hill, to make sure that the zoning that we have on the books will align with highest and best use. If your grand list is changing and you can't explain why, that's a bad thing. But if your grand list is changing and it's the product of years of planning and approvals at town meeting, that's a good thing. So some people are concerned sometimes to see the shift from one to the other. Some of that is driven by the market. Some of that is very intentional. And relatively speaking, Danvers is still in a very strong position in terms of the commercial base that we enjoy.
The next revenue category is state aid. So again, in monitoring our long-term fiscal health and over-reliance on state aid can be problematic, as we saw a couple years ago when they level funded 2 of the major aid categories. We're purely reliant on the state budget process for this revenue, which again could be a problem during times of economic uncertainty. And then the major source of this is Chapter 70, which makes up about 7 of the 11 million in state aid. Chapter 70 has been increasing statewide, but a lot of that, again, has been targeted towards low-income communities, your gateway cities, Methuen, Lawrence, et cetera. So again, we're not one of the wealthier communities, but when they're doling out Chapter 70, unfortunately, our wealth metrics end up hurting us there.
How does the general difference between a city and town, how does that equate to percentage of state aid that's derived? Does the state give a higher percentage to cities as opposed to towns?
Yep.
And so if we look like the city of Salem, the city of Peabody, Beverly, they're actually, because of their designation as a city, they're going to get that higher amount. It's not that they inherently deserve more for some reason. It's that by virtue of being a city, they get more.
It's almost exclusively as a result of the Chapter 70 formula. He's very familiar with it. But yeah.
I would just, if I could add too, I think I'm hearing correlation. You know, cities generally are larger, and the larger communities, a lot of state aid is tied to socioeconomic and is need-based. So the correlation is the larger cities are cities. They also tend to score more favorably in the formulas for the state aid. So town versus city is the mechanism. The formula is blind to your legal designation.
Okay.
So
yeah, it's purely aggregate wealth is the major driver. Yep. And here in this chart, you see the benchmark, and as you could expect, like we talked about. So Salem and Peabody are on the higher end. We're on the bottom half as far as state aid as percent of total revenue. State average is even higher than Salem or Peabody. Again, that's skewed by some of the larger communities, your Bostons, your Lawrence. I mean, in Lowell, our budget was 67% state aid. So I mean, 10 or 15 gateway cities can really skew that state average, and you're seeing that in this data.
And so someone who's looking at this afterwards, you really can't look at one slide. You have to look at the context of the slide. So the slide on page 13 is property tax revenue. Salem's down. It derives 64% of its income through property tax. But you have to go a couple of slides later to realize how much more state aid they get that offsets. It's not apples to apples on any one slide. It is contextual between several of these slides.
Correct.
For example, if Wenham was in here, they'd have a totally different picture because they have very little commercial base, and their tax balance would be far different.
Exactly, and that's why For the revenue, it's a little bit clearer. It gets even messier on the expenditure side, which I'll talk about when we get there, but every community handles their expenditures different. Some may not have a water enterprise fund that may just be folded into their operating budget. Another community might have a separate trash and recycling enterprise fund. So again, I think revenue, it's a little bit clearer, and again, like you said, they all sort of feed into each other. But on the expenditure side, the benchmarks get a little bit less insightful. Our last major category of local receipts is local receipts for revenue. Again, we talked a little bit about the 2012 number being a little artificially inflated. But if you look in recent years, we were right around that 13.5% prior to the pandemic. In 21, that number dropped. We've rated that weak for now, just again, because of the sizable drop in meals, hotel, motel, et cetera. As we saw with the quarterly report earlier tonight, those numbers are rebounding. So we're fairly confident that next year, hopefully, we'll be able to come back in, and that'll be a stable metric as we come out of the pandemic. But for now, with a drop like that, I don't think it's reasonable for us to call that stable at the moment. This is our economic growth revenue. Again, this is from, so all these metrics derive from a document produced by the ICMA on financial indicators. And for economic growth, two that they point out specifically are both new growth and generating of building permits. We budget those conservatively, basically around the baseline that we expect. So those years where you see it spike, it can usually be tied to some large projects, like Kirkbride a few years back, Total Wine and their personal property a few years ago. So that's why you'll see some spikes in some of those years. They've been reliable funding sources, and they didn't drop during the pandemic, which was welcome. However, again, we should still budget them conservatively because any type of economic downturn could hit these pretty drastically. And it's good that we budget these conservative. As you'll see on the next slide, new growth in particular is trailing some of our peers. So this is a 3-year look at new growth as a percent of the prior year levy limit. As you can see, Danvers is on the lower side with a 3-year average. Most of them within a percent or two of each other than Salem, which is a little bit higher. Linfield's 3-year average is, they're going to be on the lower end because they spiked probably when Market Street opened, and I wouldn't imagine they'll spike again anytime soon. But this is one area where, again, we can permanently add to our revenue capacity by generating new growth. And it's definitely a metric we should be monitoring and looking for ways to enhance. There's no other revenue questions on the expenditure section.
Thank you.
The first slide is expenditures per capita. You'll see mostly steady over the years with some variation. If you were to dive deeper into some of these years, and again, these are adjusted for inflation. If you were to dive deeper, you could tie a lot of that, any variation, to snow and ice or other big ticket items that popped. For the most part, we have a pretty conservative budget process, and we stay within our 2.5 limits. Some of the categories that are exceeding 2.5%, however, include healthcare up until our redesign changes in the past, our pension assessment going up 8% annually, Essex Tech going up a double-digit percent increase annually over the past several years. So again, and there's a pie chart that's coming up next, you can see that every dollar that exceeds 2.5% in those categories has to come from somewhere. So if we're unable to generate new revenue, it leads to cuts in other areas of the budget. This expenditure slide shows you that 10-year chart. If you look at them, they seem somewhat consistent, but that's a little misleading. So for example, if you look at benefits, it made up 13% of the budget in 2012. It makes up the same amount, 13% in 2021. However, as we dig into the benefits slide a couple slides from now, that's in large part due to our redesign. We redesigned, we changed carriers, we implemented an opt-out program that saved north of $500,000 in cost avoidance. So again, a lot of work and some big changes led to that just staying at 13%. You see the pension number increasing, again, with 8% increases every year to fully fund by 2035. That's expected. Education, only a % increase. But you'll see where it's coming out of. It's coming out of general government. I mean, we can't we can't not pay our debt, we can't not pay our fixed costs. So unfortunately, it starts to become a squeeze on general government. So that's public works, administrative costs, et cetera. So again, something to monitor long-term, that as some of those fixed costs outpace 2.5, it's going to continue to squeeze other areas of the budget. And this is our benchmark, again, expenditure per capita. We're right in line, but again, I would just add that it's good to look at some of our peer communities, but there are a variety of reasons why these numbers may be skewed. Again, it could be various uses of enterprise funds, how they handle a variety of fees for services, et cetera. But still something good to show, and then, again, we're pretty much right in line with not just the peer communities, but the state average as well.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question, please?
Absolutely, anytime, jump in.
Rodney, you're getting squeezed, Essex Tech, pensions, other things. You got to cut on government. So expenditures per capita, how can you say it's stable and not weak?
I would say in the aggregate, it's stable just because, again, we haven't required an override at this point. We haven't required a debt exclusion. Again, we usually turn back 1 to 3% in expenditures each year. So in that sense, it's stable. But again, if the trend continues with some of those fixed costs like Essex Tech and others, it could be a potential where stable isn't the right metric for this. It is downgraded to weak. But as of right now, again, we're paying our bills. We're providing all the services we intend to provide.
So it's stable because you're able to do that. Yeah. But the forecast for the future doesn't look promising.
I would say it would require us to make a lot more decisions like we did with healthcare and achieving some debt refinancing. And I think, again, those are once a decade, things that pop up that we're able to take advantage of.
You can only
to your point, there's not going to be
right, but you only
healthcare
refinance so many
redesigns every year to balance
times.
our budget. Yeah.
Right.
And I think that the questions you're poking at dovetail with the conversation at the end of the presentation where we talk a little bit about the road ahead.
Okay. I'll wait for the road ahead.
If you can go back one slide to the pie chart, can I presume that the Essex Tech is part of the orange?
That's a good question. Yes, they are.
And if it is, how much of the 45% represented in 2021 is Essex Tech? It's going to waiver, obviously. That's one of our issues that we have to deal with.
So in just pure dollars, not adjusted for inflation,
Yep.
the education budget in 2012 was, and this is in the supporting documentation, the Danvers school budget was $32.4 million. Essex Tech, it was 1.3. Now, in 2021, education on the Danvers Public School side was $42.9 million. Essex Tech was $3 million. So, again, I won't do the math quick, but Essex Tech is essentially more than doubled
Right.
in that period. So yes, that's a contributing factor to it, the 44 to 45%.
Because I see our friends in school administration looking at each other when these numbers come up, and I want to be clear that part of that increase from 44% to 45% is directly attributable to Essex Tech, which is one of the issues we have to talk about, we have to work on here. So thank you. I just want to make sure I was interpreting it accurately. And by the way, I should have said this as well. This is not a presentation, this is a financial summit to all of our financial partners in this town. The selectmen are just one of the partners in this town. So if there are members of the audience here from the school committee, from school administration, from the finance committee, from the library board of trustees, who have questions as we go along, I should have said this earlier, please feel free. This is a collaboration. This is a partnership. It's not a presentation to the board with you as you're an equal participant in these discussions. Jump up, raise your hand, ask the questions you need to ask. If we don't think to ask them and you think there should be clarity, please jump right in. I'll come back at the end and ask if there's any that we happen to miss early on, but from this point forward, I was remiss in not suggesting people jump in. It is a partnership. This isn't a town run by the selectmen. It's a town run by all these boards and commissions, and the finance committee keeps us honest to it. So.
Next, we have salaries as a percent of net operating expenditures. And this is a a strong metric for a couple of reasons. One, if you look at the percentage it made up in 2021, it's actually less than the percentage it made up in 2012. And that's for a variety of factors. Again, offering fair but affordable cost of living adjustments, being very critical of new positions added and identifying a critical need for those positions to be added. And the bonus effect is not only does it keep this metric strong, but obviously that has a direct impact on other post-employment benefits, on pension costs, on our benefits budget.
This is another contextual number that helps. It often comes up in discussions about why can't we cut the budget, why can't we zero fund, why can't we make certain accommodations, when more than half of your budget is going towards salaries, which often are contractual obligations with our unions. There's not a lot of room for us to make cuts. That all the cuts happen in non-salaried expenditures. At that point, we owe it to the people who work hard for this town to pay them an effective and appropriate amount of money. And so right now, if you say we have a $107 million budget, that's 60 million of that right there is untouchable if you consider salaries and wages untouchable from a theoretical perspective and from a contractual perspective from the unions. Union side, and then layer on top of that the fact that we have the benefits that go along with that, health and others. So the discretionary funding we have is on top of that. So this number is important for people to understand when we come and talk about our budget, and we'll be talking about it in the upcoming months.
Correct.
Do we have any salary obligations that are indexed? Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about inflation last year. Are there any built-in wage increases that are coming into supply next year because of what's happening in the broader?
So Rodney, if you don't mind repeating the question when you answer
Sure,
it for
yeah.
the people who are on TV.
Ted Blake, a member of Finance Committee, had a question on whether or not our salary increases or any of them are tied to any type of index or CPI. All our contracts are negotiated for a fixed number of years with a fixed percentage increase. On the benefits side, as a percent of net operating expenditures, this is stable. As you can see, it was hovering around 12 to 13% for the past decade. It dropped in 2021. Again, that's part of our reset with our design and carrier changes, us offering a high deductible healthcare plan, as well as our opt-out program, which I mentioned, and we'll talk about a little bit this during the FY23 budget process. But we introduced that opt-out program. We made, in 21 alone, $191,000 in opt-out payments, which equated to $550,000 in avoided premium costs. So between that and the redesign and the drop in our rate by switching to Maya, you can see the results there. Without those two mechanisms, this would be well past 13% and approaching 14% at this point of the total expenditures. So again, this is one of those things where we're able to, long-term plan and make some changes to reset the baseline, but that number will start to go up again, and it's something to monitor. But to the point on fixed costs, we don't have cards to play every year for some of these fixed costs.
Again, back to my previous comment, if you layer on the salaries and the benefits, we're talking between 68 and 70% of our budget every year just for paying the employees what they deserve.
Next, we'll look into reserves. First one being a combination of our free cash and stabilization funds. This is stable based on our current position, but coming out of the pandemic, this could be one where we upgrade to strong. The ratings agencies are very pleased to see that we didn't need to use our general stabilization to balance the operating budget. They're pleased that for our debt stabilization, which is our working reserve fund, that we have a long-term plan and analysis on how to use that to absorb debt increases into the levy in a sustainable manner. Free cash, again, we have our policy to usually leave 1% behind coming out of town meeting. We increased that number to about 1.5% as part of the 22 budget process. So that helped contribute to a good free cash number for '22. Yeah, again, so you can see the dip from using the debt stabilization fund for the high school, middle school project. You can see the increase moving up as we built that fund to take on the Smith project. What you see in '21 and what we hope to continue in the out years, it doesn't drop down as significantly. And that's due to, again, us making sure we leave the 1% free cash and also continuing to maintain our general stabilization, both as an emergency break this glass if you need it reserve, and also as the backbone of our undesignated fund balance. Here's another benchmark which I'm going to introduce and point out the flaws in. I apologize. Free cash as a percent of total revenue, 5.3% is a good number. At 3 to 7% is a good range to be in for generating free cash. Some of those, such as Reading, could be skewed. They're not necessarily generating 15%. Many communities don't necessarily set up a general stabilization fund. They just leave their money in free cash. For example, you may look at Cambridge and say they have $100 million in free cash. They did not generate $100 million in surplus last year. That's just what they use for their reserve. We try to transfer it out into general stabilization because, again, that secures it, and it also is viewed more favorably amongst rating agencies because those raters come from all different parts of the country. And free cash, which is neither free nor cash, is a strange term for someone out in the Midwest. A stabilization fund is easy for them to understand and easy for them to mark as a true reserve. So that's why we make an effort to put it into general stabilization. Financial indicator number 10, that's our undesignated fund balance. As Zach mentioned earlier, we are at 12.9% at the end of '21. Our range is to be at least 8 to 12%. We're a little over that. Again, that's due to us being ultra conservative during the pandemic and having some favorable results coming out of it. As I mentioned again, that the general stabilization we would like to continue to maintain as the backbone of that undesignated fund balance. This number will also come down as we appropriate free cash as part of the FY23 budget process.
I could, before you move on, Ryan, just kind of an interesting note. If you were to overlay the reserves and free cash slide onto this one, the roller coasters are almost inverse from each other, and that's not unintentional. So Rodney noted the debt stabilization peaked in 2012. That's about the time we started taking on the high school debt. It hit a valley in 15. That's about the time we started building it back up for Smith. It peaked again in around 18 and is now dipping again. The board has established exploring the public works facility as a priority for the year. So part of an opportunity that we'll talk to the board and the finance committee and town meeting about in the spring is using the favorable unassigned fund balance figure to start to replenish that debt stabilization so that we are prepared for the next major capital project that's coming along. And again, I think this is where the agencies, typically when they see roller coasters, they get nervous, but when you can explain to them how these funds have been used for the past 10 or 15 years to plan for projects, they're very happy with that.
Next, we have the liability section, first being the pension liability. So this metric, you have your chart from last year, you'll notice it hasn't changed. We're in the valuation period now for '22. Valuation is as of 1/1/22, but the actual data collection and process means that we won't get our '22 valuation until probably sometime this summer. At this point, we're 60.3% funded based on our last valuation. And we can look at that comparatively as we go into the benchmarks. What you have here is your percent funded, so that's again the amount of assets you have versus your liability. You have the most recent valuation date, again, which for us was January 2020. You have the investment return assumption, so that's our assumed rate of return on our investment. And then you have our projected year of being fully funded. Danvers' 7.5% was middle of the pack a couple years ago. Now it's on the higher end. And it's something that our rating agencies have pointed out is probably a little bit higher than it should be compared to similar communities. The Danvers Retirement Board is the one who has the authority to vote on this. They are cognizant, and I believe that we'll probably lower that as part of the next valuation period. The 2035, again, is in line and a little bit higher than the average. but it's worth noting that some of these other communities who have recently done valuations have lowered their investment return assumption, and in doing so have kicked out the years they'll be fully funded. So for example, Stoneham was 2024 up until the latest evaluation, and they pushed it out. Our hope is that with our strong investment return, the fact that we're 60% funded, and that we have an 8% built in to our long-term planning, that we should be able to lower that investment return assumption and maintain the 2035 date. But a lot of that will come out as we go through the valuation process over the next several months. Good.
What are you assuming, 8 right now or 7.5?
7.5.
What, so you don't know what the sensitivity is if you took that down 25 basis points without?
On what it would do with the liability? Yeah, we have that. I can provide that to the board and to everyone. It's in our GASB report, but yeah. It's a significant, that each percentage is a significant dial turn either way. And next we have our OPEB liability. So this is net position as the percent of total OPEB liability. So again, this is comparing our investment versus our liability, as you can see, and as Zach touched on a little bit earlier. It's significantly lower than our pension. The idea of even recognizing OPEB liability is a new concept, much less funding it. There are no state requirements in place on funding it, so it is in the community's best interest to fund it, which is why Danvers has set up a fund and makes contributions each year. But there's no set target date to fully fund. It's our, I guess, our goal or intention that once pension is fully funded in 2035, that would free up some money to divert to our OPEB liability. Other than that, again, we increase our contribution $50,000 each year, so it'll be close to $1 million as part of the FY23 recommendation. And that's something we've committed to as part of the board's adopted financial policy guidelines to increase that contribution at minimum by $50,000 each year. Next, we have a liability, which is a very strong metric, and that's our debt service as a percent of operating expenditures. The goal and the industry standard is to have it be under 10% of total expenditures. Danvers usually works around being under 6% or close to 6%, and that's where we utilize our debt stabilization fund to keep it around that 6% as new debt is absorbed. A couple things worth pointing out. We mentioned the refunding that saved the town $6 million over the life of that bond. We had a favorable return on our borrowing this past August, which we brought to the board on the Smith School and some water and sewer projects. We also annually contribute free cash to fund capital outlay. So this is your heavy equipment. This is your sanders, your plows, your fire trucks, maybe the ladder, that'll probably be bonded, but some of those smaller but still significantly costly equipment and vehicles. By being able to fund those out of free cash, we estimate that's saving a full percent on our debt services versus total expenditure. So that 6.3% number, if we weren't generating the free cash to be able to invest in equipment, could easily be at 7.3, 7.5%. And when you look at the next slide, which shows our comparison with our benchmark communities.
Can you go back? Sorry, Ryan, for 1 second. It is, I'm going to disagree slightly with what Ronnie just said. It is still a strong outlook, but one note, something Zach mentioned to us when we did our preliminary review of the audit, something that all the agencies look at is how much of your debt you're retiring in the next 10 years. They're always looking at a 10-year look ahead. And we're at about 60%, and the agencies want to see you at 70 to 75%. So when you're looking ahead 10 years, to be in compliance with best practice, you should be retiring 3/4 of your debt in the first 10 years. Where this gets tricky in Massachusetts, particularly with Proposition 2.5, and we talked about this with the Smith School project, we have plenty of capacity in the eyes of the financial world to borrow more, to use our debt service more. But because of our position with the tax levy, we can't do that without a debt exclusion. Therefore, so that happened, two things happened. We level funded the high school, which is set up like a traditional mortgage, and we level funded the Smith School. That drives down your funding ratio over the short term, and it means you spend more on interest in the long term. So we ended up spending an additional $16 million in interest to build the Smith School because of the way we structured that debt. In other parts of the country, you would have had a declining debt curve, which is typically what you want to see. These numbers would be a little bit higher, but we would be retiring a lot more of that debt during the first half or third of its useful life. So moving forward, the pieces kind of, you push and pull, but they do conflict with each other. So we're very strong here, but we're also, because of our position with the limit, there's very little we can do to be more creative with the debt service. Sorry, thanks.
Correct, yeah, and again, so we'd view that as strong as that 6% not being close to 10%. Our limit is all the other budget pressures limiting what debt we're able to take on. And then, yeah, again, as you can see on the lower side of our comparative communities. Next, we introduced last year a couple of slides on utilities. Again, most of our data on the revenue expenditure side was specific to the general fund, but utilities make up, close to $20 million of our annual operating budget, so it's worth pointing out some of the metrics and trends on those. The first one being water and sewer revenue versus total sales. As we've talked about in recent years, we've had declining sales, but still a need to maintain our aging infrastructure. The result is increasing rates as sales drop. We had a slight uptick in 21 in sales, which was good. And when we look at forecasting rates with the commission this coming spring, we'll be looking at that positive number in 21 and looking at 22's growth. But again, something to monitor.
What is the relationship? I guess I'm probably under the misunderstanding. I thought sewer revenue was in relation to your water revenue. You bought so much and you were charged so much sewer based on what you bought for water.
That would be different if you had, so example, if you had a sprinkler or something like that. You could have a separate meter that isn't tied into sewer.
All right.
Rodney, that slide isn't reflective of what we have in front of us with that triangle.
We had the triangle last year, and I, at the last minute this afternoon, took the triangle out because the triangle didn't necessarily match the graph. So that's
Right, that's why I couldn't understand what it was trying
the
to.
triangle that we had in last year that, for your first draft we left in this year, was to show that dip and show that sales were going down, but we still needed to maintain that revenue, and that's really where the squeeze was happening.
Okay.
And then new this year, we have an electric side. So the electric division was able to pull this together, showing the 10 years, the cost to buy and provide electricity has decreased and evened out, even as wholesale power costs have come down. Overall system sales have been declining since 2012. That's as we see energy efficient lighting, HVAC systems have improved efficiency, which is good for our electric sales. The so-called efficiency implosion is leveling out, and we're projecting sales to stabilize from 2020 on, and hopefully sales will increase as we see electrification in the form of electric vehicles, heat pumps, and other sources of electrification.
How much would you, and I don't expect an exact, how much would you guesstimate solar has detracted from sale?
I can find out for you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Working on it.
Yeah.
And in summary on the utility slides, I would note that we've seen a decline in sales in both utilities, and they're both driven by different things. I mean, both utilities are impacted by weather. If it's a wet or a dry summer, that has a big impact on water sales. If it's a hot or a cold season relative to the trend line, that has a big impact on electric sales. But the decline, and the board knows this, but as part of this presentation, the decline in water sales is driven largely by the permitting and regulatory environment. So DEP tells us very specifically in our water permit how many gallons of water we can sell at a particular time of year, how many gallons per capita we can sell. We have a summer sales cap. And so we introduce things like low flow shower heads and et cetera. Those do not account for the decline in sales as much as the regulatory environment. Electric's very different. The decline in sales in electric is almost entirely driven by increases in efficiency in street lighting and home appliances, et cetera. But as Rodney mentioned, the utility, our electric department is projecting that will rebound as we start to see more electric vehicles purchased in the community. Homes are starting to convert, and the department is starting to incentivize moving away from oil-based heat to far more efficient electric-based heat, which is cleaner and generates revenue for the local utility rather than a national utility. So both declining, but very different stories within the curves.
Mr. Bradstreet, please.
Town is always asking for conservation of the townspeople, whether it be water use, electrical use. How does that affect in a positive way the budget? If you're not getting as much revenue because electric sales are down, how is that loss of revenue made up?
I think that
Or is it?
the electric department would like to sell as much electricity as possible to users who are using it as efficiently as they can, if that makes any sense. So we want to make sure that homes are weather-tight, energy efficient. We want to make sure that, we do incentivize people to replace inefficient systems with efficient systems because it's just generally good. But that does, if you do that in the aggregate, it can cause sales to drop. When we swap out the old light fixtures with the high efficiency LEDs, there's a noticeable impact on electric department revenue. But we're not going to go back and reinstall the old ones to spike sales. We're going to continue to make efficiency investments because of the big picture benefit. But so that's to the point where the department tries to incentivize the use of electric vehicles and tries to incentivize home systems that are more electric based rather than oil or gas based.
I didn't mean to pick on just the electric division. There are other divisions in town that,
And this is a challenge.
Yeah.
No, this is a challenge on all our municipal funds, which is you need to pay for poles, you need to pay for pipes in the ground, you need to pay, and that's almost independent of sales. So as sales decline, but costs stay the same or go up for expenditures, you have to try to figure out how to make the difference. That's one of your questions regarding some fees that you see on your electric bill now. We're trying to say, even if you are a high efficiency user, or maybe you have solar, we still have to pay for the poles that get to your house in the last mile. So it's trying to balance that. It's a monster we create, but it's a monster we embrace. We want efficiency.
again, I wasn't singling out.
No, you weren't.
division.
Nope. We only have the 3 enterprise funds, so it's water, sewer, and electric, and you got 1/3.
Again, I'm not singling out any.
So next, we take a look at some of our operating budget pressures. It highlights several that, if not now, routinely over the past several years have outstripped 2.5%. The first is our retirement contribution. Again, we're projecting roughly 8% a year, at least for the next several years, if not until we're fully funded in 2035. Healthcare, we saw the positive results of some of the new programs and changes. But if you look back to 18 to 20, we were going up at 5% a year. Danvers Public Schools, a 2.8% 3-year average, which Keith will tell me I should be very thankful. Yeah. But again, it's a very reasonable increase in the scheme of public education. However, when you're limited by 2.5, every penny over 2.5 has to come from somewhere else. And then Essex Tech, which 13% over a 3-year average. And as we saw those numbers, it's more than doubled in the past 10 years, and really less than 10 years has it more than doubled.
If I could, sorry, I was going to underscore that point, but continue.
Yeah, I was going to add for the upcoming budget, again, with tax levy capacity, we're projecting 2.2 million based on Prop 2.5, and projecting new growth of around 600,000 is 2.8 million. Those are the funds for any new increases, contractual, fixed costs, et cetera. And as you can see with some of these budget drivers, they bring us right up just on these couple of categories alone, which makes budgeting a challenge. And we still don't know. I'd love to give you some information on the Essex Tech 23 budget, but we haven't received any yet, so more to come on that.
And I think the point I would make on Essex Tech, and the 3 boards represented in this room have had a lot of conversations about the trends we've been seeing over the past couple of years. The assessment went up $325,000 in the current year. Although we don't have a budget yet, we do know the enrollment numbers. We're bracing for another $500,000 increase in our assessment this year, despite 2 or 3 years of requesting that the committee be mindful of the impact that that has on our municipal budget. And Mr. Blake from the Finance Committee is in the room. He attended a Essex Tech Subcommittee meeting with Mr. Conley and I, where we tried to express our concerns to them. Our concerns were not received or acknowledged. We've had discussions with the delegation about options of controlling Danvers enrollment through a home rule petition, and they've expressed that that is a very appropriate route, should we choose to go that way. I was on the phone this morning with the senator, and that's a discussion we're having. We've talked throughout the evening about changes made to the health care plan, restructuring of debt. We have played cards to the point Mr. Bennett made that you can't play every year. So we've redesigned the health plan. We avoided considerable costs in doing so. We restructured our debt, took pressure off the operating budget. 2 of the stated goals this board has had for the last 2 years has been to move OPEB funding and capital into the operating budget so we're less reliant on free cash. We generated more than enough capacity in the budget to do that through those mechanisms we described. Every penny and then some has been absorbed by the Essex Tech assessment, and that is the single element in our budget that we have absolutely no control over. Whether with the pension, that is a fixed cost, but there are mechanisms the retirement board can use in terms of adjusting their return assumptions, adjusting their retirement deadline, et cetera. Health, we have some control over. Essex Tech is the single expense driver in our budget that we have no control over, and we've had no success to date trying to get the school committee there to work with us to make that more predictable and sustainable.
I'm here now as a library trustee, but how are other communities that feed into Essex Tech dealing with the changes in finances?
So we are uniquely positioned. Mr. Blake has done a lot of his own research into this. Do you want to go to the microphone, Tim?
Sure. So the answer is that they're not. Since there's a slide on the Essex Tech website, if you go to it and look at enrollment before the expansion, and there's a slide, a year-by-year display of enrollment at the various communities that are member towns from Essex Tech. And I think it was 2014 or so when they did the expansion or started it to now. There are several towns whose enrollment has gone up somewhat, let's say 10%. I think Beverly's probably went up 10% between 2014 and now. So when we signed on to that, I wasn't part of, blessing any of that. We didn't live here at the time, my family, but I'm assuming it was, and it was probably reasonable to assume at that time that when Danvers blessed the expansion and the construction of that school, we probably assumed we were going to have some pro rata increase of the total enrollment, and that overall enrollment at the school would look similar from community to community, 5 years forward. What's happened is over the last 5 years, enrollment at Essex Tech has grown substantially from the neighboring communities. And by neighboring, I mean immediately adjacent. So if you look at Peabody's enrollment, it's gone up significantly. It's the only largest district whose enrollment relative to its student population is as high as ours, or has increased as much as ours. If you look at Middleton, you'll see the same thing. So to answer that question, it's really, there's a specific to Essex Tech. There's only a few towns that are dealing with this, and cities, I should say. We may be the only town if you went back and looked at it. So that's.
So I assume this is why the new growth of this 1.08% or whatever it was is the really important thing to focus on, because we really need that to increase before we can offset all of these other issues that we have to pay for, and that we can't get more with the problem.
Yeah, so short of, again, Prop 2.5 limits us, it'd be new growth, other receipts, or the alternative is, finding ways to cut, which again, as we talked about, most of those costs are fixed costs, so it's really not.
But our new growth isn't high anyway, so we really need to focus on somehow that.
Can we thumbtack that, Nova, till the last slide? There's this big buildup, and everyone's going to be disappointed when we get there, but. We'll go through this slide relatively quickly. This is a slide that we tweak a little bit each year, but it's a reminder, we completed a project like the Smith School, and that we should feel proud, and there's a sense of accomplishment there, but there are always more projects coming. We have we maintain a lot of inventory, we maintain a lot of infrastructure, buildings, rolling fleet, et cetera. So one of the priority projects right now is the new Public Works Yard. David Lane, Select Board Member Bernard is working with the Public Works Department. We're trying to evaluate sites to determine what we can do moving forward. That could be a $50 million project, depending on how involved we want to be in addressing some of the real shortcomings that we have with our current facilities. That's on the horizon. That's a school project, although it's not a school, it's a public works facility. Smith School is completed. Highlands roof was completed last year. We know we have work to do on the Riverside roof. But some of the newer, quote-unquote, elementary schools are now coming up on 30 years old. They may not require rebuilds the way that Smith did, but there will certainly be large investments that we're going to have to make into those schools to maintain them and make sure that the current learning environment is appropriate and the technology is appropriate, et cetera. And then the blue box, the quality of life. These are projects in the last few years that have been studied by volunteer committees. Groups have expressed an interest in. Some, like the rail trail, are ongoing. But we acquired LaBelle's Grove. We developed a conceptual plan for it, and that plan sits on the shelf. The Recreation Department for years has been working with stakeholders on ideas to enhance and enliven the Sandy Beach area. The Hay Barn project was put on ice going into the pandemic last year. The rail trail expansion is a positive note, and we plan to have a presentation to the board this spring on where that stands, because we've made a lot of headway on that project. But this is a partial list. I mean, there are a lot of projects that have been discussed and explored, and none are inexpensive.
That blue box could be a advertisement for CPA.
Can we go to the next slide, Ron? So the conclusion here, and to try to tie this, oh, I'm sorry, Bill.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bradstreet.
You're talking about school renovations, all these buildings have roofs. Would this be a good time to install solar units on these roofs? Would it be cost effective? Would it be a cost for us to do it?
You must have the Public Works office bugged, Bill, because, and we've talked a little bit,
I mentioned it before, that's why.
so the Smith School roof was designed for solar, and that project is being designed right now. So Electric is actively working on a solar installation for Smith and one other school. And Stephen King of the engineering department and Clint Allen are also working with the state on getting the landfill permitted for solar. So we are looking at roofs and designing roofs as well as ground mount for solar at this point.
One other question about the school. With Smith School being new, can it actually accommodate one of the older elementary schools?
Rodney, can you repeat the question?
The question, yeah.
I don't know, like, how much the population in each school, if that can get, like, divided so that we don't have to renovate 3 schools, and this school is brand new, can that take students?
While Keith is coming up, can I characterize that as a 50-year question? Because I think the short and insufficient answer is you can, but that would require planning out over multiple building project cycles.
So I say Smith School doesn't have enough excess capacity to accept that many students. It does have some excess capacity to allow for enrollment growth, or that to be the model, and that is the model that the Mass School Building Authority is moving towards, is less buildings but bigger buildings to account for that. So potentially down the road, let's say in 20 years, if we get 50 years out of a building, we could be looking at replacing 2 elementary schools rather than the 3 to have that cost efficiency in both the operations and the building end of actually doing a building project. No, a little bit, it has like 1 extra classroom at each grade level, but that's not enough to sustain a whole school.
And I want to be clear that that is not a deficiency in our planning. It's that our reimbursement rate was based on targeted enrollment. They wouldn't pay for us to build a school and a half.
So the conversation that we wanted to have at the end to kind of try to tie this together, the different threads we've talked about. You know, our population has grown at a little less than 0.6% over the past 10 years. That actually trends just ahead of the county, but it trends behind both the state and the nation. So we're not growing per se, we're sort of keeping up with the broader population trend. Certainly if you compare New England in its totality to places like the southeastern United States or parts of Texas and the Dallas area where double-digit growth every couple of years is not uncommon. So we're not growing, that's relatively flat. The new growth, when you strip out permits, our growth each year is less than 1%, we're about 0.9%. That's over a 10-year period. And so when we talk about things like, you know, the population is growing very slowly, growth is relatively flat, but we have things like Essex Tech assessments that are growing. Those are fixed costs that are growing at a rapid rate. We do have some control over things like pension and healthcare, but not complete. So without growth, status quo essentially erodes your ability to maintain your assets, to provide services to the public. We can't, this was mentioned earlier, we can't change health plans every year or two to try to fight off healthcare trends. We can't restructure debt every single year to try to create budget capacity. So that leads us to the final slide here, and the board in the fall identified conducting a community-wide strategic plan as one of its objectives for the year. We were fortunate enough to receive an earmark in the state budget this year to the tune of $125,000. Jen Breaker, our assistant town manager, and Nick Campion, our assistant recreation director, are partnering together to kind of lead that charge. They're in the fact-finding stages right now in terms of communicating with other communities and about plans they've developed and consultants that they've worked with, so that we can start to drill into some of the questions that are on the screen, but also obviously many more questions. But these get at, and when Mr. Conley started the presentation tonight, and he talked about the bottom right square in our financial budget, that's the service solvency. So when we look ahead and think about, you know, the expectations that residents have, are those changing? What is the right level of growth or an economic development for the community to meet these expectations? You know, Mr. Fields and the planning department and the planning board and town meeting have put a tremendous amount of energy into cleaning up, tightening up, and modernizing the zoning book to encourage the right kind of growth in the right areas, and I think we're going to start to see some of that. But we need to make sure that it's happening in a way that is acceptable and comfortable to people. So when we get to the last bullet, we can do these things while maintaining the look and feel of the community that people who chose to live here are satisfied with. But we're a changing community too. You know, we need to account for the demands and the needs as we think about the fact that we have a diversifying population. We're diversifying racially, we're diversifying by age, the socioeconomics in Danvers are starting to change, and so we have to put those realities into the context of the service level expectations that people have on a moving forward basis. And I think, you know, this is the first time in my career I've gone through a strategic planning process. I'm very excited about it because I think it's an opportunity to get a sense from the community of what matters to them, what they want this town to be in 10 years, so that we can start, we can use the information we gather in this process to make changes, to make sure that expectations align with resources. There's an expression we used, I think, 2 years ago, which I inartfully stole from a colleague in Virginia who said, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And I think that's kind of the point of the strategic planning process, is to help residents understand the trade-offs between service level delivery and the resources that are required to do that, so that we can be thoughtful about how we move forward. So at this point, I think we're interested in hearing from all of the officials in the room in terms of what their thoughts are about what we just presented. And certainly as the planning process moves forward, there will be, I think, both opportunities and expectations that our major boards are involved in having conversations with the project team to make sure that those voices are incorporated. So the draft scope that we've pulled together describes it essentially as a 10-year, but kind of looking to 2030, because we don't really want to land on 2032. That feels very anticlimactic. But if we get this process started, it'll essentially be like a 7-year, but if we can get it aligned as a 2030 plan, in theory, then you monitor it and manage it, but you can update it then as you move forward.
Would you think of putting in a review of the Town Manager Act in the strategic planning?
So the charter review process in the Commonwealth is very, it's spelled out very clearly. I would think that the outcome of the strategic planning process could lead to the formation of a committee that would then want to incorporate changes to reflect some of the takeaways from the process. I don't think the process itself would do that because the review commission is a separate statutory body that is created for that sole purpose.
Thank you.
Anybody else, please?
I see that you guys do take a lot of pride in the planning over the years, and I think the one thing I would want to make sure that I left tonight with is making it really clear, or making sure that everybody understands that when we do send a student to Essex Tech, we're not saving dollars one for one within the district. And there's a few things that go into that. And, my comments are informed partially by meetings I've had over the years.
Ted, you got the microphone.
Sure. As well as, watching deliberations here. When we send someone to Essex Tech, the bill is very discrete, right? Rodney gave us the number. You can take that number and divide it by the number of students, and that's what we pay per student to send to Essex Tech. It's very straightforward. What we spend within the district, I think net of state funding, and Keith, feel free to refresh my numbers on this, but it's roughly $2,500 to $3,000 less per student within the district. Within that number, there are costs that don't go up with the incremental student. There's the cost for the brand new high school that we built, which I believe was outfitted for 1,100 students, and right now has a little over 800. If you do the math on the applications at Essex Tech for next year and assume a similar acceptance rate to the prior few years, we're on track to probably lose 30% of our 8th grade middle school class, between 25 and 30% to Essex Tech. So you're looking at a high school next year with enrollment of less than 800 students. And I know we pride ourselves on managing taxpayer resources very wisely here, that you're basically looking at a school that's got 300 extra seats in it at that point. And that's not to say the educations are the same. This is the financial summit. Those are decisions we can talk about at different times. Then the other issues within the district are the other things we spend money on that aren't associated with your typical student are special education expenses and district outplacements. The students at Essex Tech admit statistically are almost identical from an MCAS standpoint to their peers in 8th grade. Is that right, Keith? So the notion, their old notions of what vocational schools were from an academic achievement standpoint, those are simply not the case. The kids that go to Essex Tech are just as capable academically, on average, as the kids that go to Danvers High School. So they're not taking kids that are harder to educate and spending more money on them. They're just taking a subsection of our students that are academically the same as the others and taking them and providing them a different academic program that costs more for the town. So it costs more for the town for 2 reasons. Number one, or 3 reasons. Number one, they are getting dedicated career programming that we aren't offering at Danvers High School. That's a fact. Number 2, we've already spent all money on all the facilities to educate those same students within our district. And those numbers are not small. That's a brand new high school. And number 3, some of the money we spend within the district that goes into that per student number is not spent on the marginal kid with no behavioral problems and perfectly normal academic capabilities in high school. That number is about $9,000 a year. Is that about right? So when you net it out, it's a $9,000 difference to send a kid to Essex Tech for 1 year than it is to keep them within the district. When we bring them back within the district, we can have a discussion on the best way to spend that money. I would say the best way to do it is to hire new teachers and fill those empty classrooms at the Smith School and at Danvers High and what have you. Or maybe it's to pay down the high school debt, whatever it is, but that's a discussion to be had. I'm not here to be a tax hawk and try and, stop. I've been on the finance committee. I think it's almost impossible not to, 2.5% is a basic lock every year with the headwinds we're facing. But I just want everybody, because it will come up, everybody needs to understand it costs us a lot more money to send people to Essex Tech. And right now, I would doubt there's any other town in the state that sends a higher percentage of kids into vocational education than we do. So our commitment to vocational education shouldn't be questioned. The question we should be having is, are we overcommitted? And as Steve said, we can do everything, but we can't do everything. Is that where we should be investing almost all of our marginal educational dollars in this district? That's it. And, if you guys have questions, it's everybody's discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Keith, maybe for you. We're talking about a lot of money to the Essex Tech. It's a great school, okay? We know that. What can we do to our Danvers public schools to retain our students? Do we offer similar services that the Essex Tech, the information technology departments, maybe not like HVAC or something like that, but something more trades for the kids, at our public schools. When I went to school at Danvers High School, they had the bookkeeping, they had woodworking. I don't even know if they still have that stuff there, I'm dating myself.
I think it is some programming, right? We need to continue to look at what we're offering. for
Computer programming.
And that's where it's hard because our enrollment is down. And when we get into our FY23 budget conversation, you'll hear us talk a lot about how that might not necessarily be direct staff cuts because there is so much more that we want to do. And there's restructuring of programs to make kids more successful. And there's a number of electives that we want to offer. And if we start cutting staff, it cuts down on our course offerings and actually almost makes it harder for us to retain kids, right?
No, I don't want to cut staff.
No, I know,
I'm saying
right?
add
So
more
that's all part of
programs.
the conversation. It's part of how do we keep resetting the culture, and our new principal this year, Adam Federico, is doing a great job at really trying to turn that culture, and he came up from the middle school. It's about actively marketing, right? Mr. Blake and I have had multiple conversations about how do we market what we're doing at Danvers High. We've never gone out and sold all of the good things about Danvers High because the kids came there.
Now
St.
we
John's
have.
Prep comes in and they want to advertise what the great things they're doing. The Essex Tech comes in and advertises about all of the amazing things about there. So how do we put together a similar? And I think the more we talk about it, originally I was hesitant to call it marketing, but that's what it is, right? We need to market ourselves to show all of the good things, how much of a great place the Danvers High School is. So I think it's all of those combined. About how
So
we
it's
continue
something
to-
that you are talking about, correct? Okay.
It is, yes.
'Cause that's
And
what we need to
had
do.
our 8th grade parent night the other night, and we left and we said we're disappointed with the number of parents that we got to come out because we had kind of redone our whole presentation. We're excited to share it. And Adam and I talked the next day about, okay, so how do we now go and come up with an informational flyer that we're going to send out to families, right? And how do we go and talk to the 8th grade students more and bring current students with us to talk to those students? So
Right.
this is the prime kind of admission season, right? So that's the work that we're
Because being a
undertaking right now.
homeowner, you look at schools, right, for your children, to educate them. Like you said, we don't want to have to say market it, but we have to let people know you're moving to Danvers because of the education, the services, the town government.
Ron, you'll hear me say
You know,
that a lot, right?
right?
That it's our
So-
number one resource that we sell as a town, right? So if our education system
Correct.
is successful, it's going to increase the property values, it's going to increase our tax revenue, and it's all self-sustaining. It is the widget, right, almost that we sell as the town of Danvers.
So we need to
It's our-
find ways to keep the students at Danvers High School and the middle school.
Right.
We have competition, plainly. If this
Yeah.
was a business and we had 2 hardware stores in competition and one advertised and one didn't, you know what's going to happen.
And that's the important part in education, right? We need to keep evolved, and now we realize that, and so we're going to take a more active approach with that than what we've done.
And
in the
even when you
past.
say the $9,000 per student or whatever the costs are, we add more services, more teachers, right? We want to be ahead of the game. So,
Right, our arts, our performing arts, all of that is, right? Those are our strong suits, right?
Right, so like really, but I don't know that we can't get students from other towns to come to Danvers, right?
And that's not something we've done in the past because of what our enrollments have been and what our capacities have been. We haven't had the space to do school choice, but that is something that we could explore in future years, if that's, something that we want to look at. I think that I know that's going to come up at our March school committee agenda, and I think we'd be a little hesitant to jump in the deep end right now with it because we are hopeful with that marketing campaign that we can start to turn that tide. And, to a certain extent, I'm also glad that our K-8 education is making our students so attractive that Essex Tech wants to accept all of them, right? That's also a testament to our students and that those are the students that Essex Tech wants to accept. But I want to bring them back in, right? I want to keep you all the way through 12th grade. So.
Go to some towns, high schools, there's college admissions over the years and this and that, some of the national merit, semifinals, they have, it's tough to find out, and just that kind of stuff as a parent. Like, that stuff, like, we should have more data about our students achieving goals.
And I guess, right, that's what.
Literally, no school should have more data on the website. The privacy, obviously, that's like, we should use the transparent as nice.
And that's what I want to hear, right? That's what we want to hear as a school district. So when you have ideas like that, please share it, right? That's, again, I like to say we're only as good as the community feedback that we get, right? And sometimes it's hard feedback, and that's good, and sometimes it's hey, try this, and that's such important data for us to take into account as we're tailoring our plans and tweaking as we go forward. So please continue to share those types of ideas.
What I'd like to suggest after hearing all this thoughtful conversation is that when we do this in the future, that we actually make this a separate workshop, summit workshop, that we can sit down. The optics of the fact that we're up here because this is a select board meeting, we're all on the level playing field in this room. We've got financial professionals who this is their profession. We've got financial partners in the schools and the library. We've got financial stewards in the finance committee, and we're all on an equal playing field, and I would like in the future the ability to sit down and ferret out and brainstorm some of these ideas that are coming up, not in the construct of a meeting like this, but more of a workshop and kind of a open to the public as well. But because we all play a very important part in the entire financial picture of the town. So if we can think about that in the future, I know Rodney's a big proponent of this financial summit and works with the town manager to get it done, and maybe in the future we can have a separate Saturday morning or some sort of sit down where we're all sitting at the same table on level ground. Is there any other thoughts, comments, follow-up on the presentation, ideas to throw out now for any of the other, how do we save money on books? Anybody got a grand idea? Or ukuleles, or all the other services they offer? Well, I think that's, I didn't mean to stop any conversation. Rodney, did you have
If I could just take 1 minute to plug these three people down the end. John LaBelle came here in September, and within 3 months, he had got our values certified, our tax rates set, and our tax bills out. Jill Summit has taken great work by Joe Collins and continued to modernize the office, introduce new policies and procedures, and now she's aggressively harassing every bank to get a great interest rate on our investment. And Heather Varney, we shared the financial team's commitment to maximizing CARES Act and FEMA. My job was to tell departments, find ways we can use that money. Heather's job was to actually do the reporting, do the collection of the data, fight with the state to make sure that the money was counted. So again, these three do great work, and we're very appreciative of them.
We also want to thank the school department professionals, financial professionals as well.
And our town clerk, too.
All of them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rodney, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for participation in the thoughtful conversation. We do have a couple more items on our agenda. And at this point, the Select Board will consider reappointments to various boards and commissions. So we have been provided a list of people who are currently up to be re-upped for their boards and commissions. And I'd like to, if the board would like to discuss each individually, that's fine, or if we want to, what's the feeling of the board?
Let's do it individually by,
All right, so there's a committee for the Human Rights and Inclusion. Jen Breaker is the town representative. And scheduled for reappointment are David McKenna, Paul Pollock, Donna Hopkins, and William Graham. All have indicated, expressed a desire and willingness to accept the reappointment.
do I make a motion to reappoint the four?
I'll make a motion to reappoint.
Motion's made, do you want a second
I'll
motion?
second it, yep.
Motion made and seconded for the reappointment to the Committee for Human Rights and Inclusion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The Board of Registers, as you can see, Kelly is eligible for reappointment, but she's indicated her decision to forego another term. So Kathy, has anybody stepped forward yet from the Democratic Party, registered Democrat, that is willing to serve yet?
Well, we've reached out to the chair of the Democratic Committee, and I believe we've got one applicant. We should be waiting until February 27th to give more time for additional applicants.
Then I recommend we table this.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Jeff Sauer and Ken Javanen are eligible for reappointment to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So, point of information, Mr. Chairman?
Yes?
Has the town solicited or received any applications from other interested persons to serve on the ZBA?
Mr. Town Manager?
We haven't had to actively recruit. We do go through the talent pool book when openings occur. Both of these individuals have expressed an interest in continuing on, and David Fields is supportive of that.
So the answer is no, you have not solicited.
We have not, no. I want to say it's either early in the pandemic or just prior to the pandemic, we had vacancies on a number of boards, including the Conservation Commission. I think at that time we did put an advertisement out to generate interest because we had exhausted most of the forms that we had on file. But at this point, I think we're in relatively good shape. But it's a good opportunity to plug the talent pool form, and anybody who's interested in volunteering and has expertise or skill that they want to offer to the town should go to the website, type in talent pool, in the Ask Us Anything button, you'll find the form. You can turn that into my office, and that's the first place that departments go to look when they anticipate openings or vacancies on any of their boards.
To build off Mr. Bennett's question, it says that at the top, that these are volunteers who are completing terms with expiration dates in 2022. If we were to, and I'm, just because we're on this line item, not for any specific reason, if we were to say, give it a month, publicly solicit or not, does that endanger the fact that the board will be without important roles?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't see any need really
All right.
to do that, but I would like to see, perhaps this time next year, that we have vetted some applicants to review, or for the town manager review to bring to us.
Very good. I'll entertain a motion to reappoint Jeff Sauer and Ken Javanen.
Second.
Well, I'll entertain a motion.
Oh,
If you want to make the motion.
I'll make the motion.
There's a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Historic District Commission, Doug DeRocher and Marcus Sidemore, and they have indicated the desire to reappointment.
Make a motion to reappoint Doug DeRocher and Marcus Sidmore.
Motion
Second.
made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The Affordable Housing Trust, Carla King and myself, in those roles, both of us have said we'd be willing to continue to serve. This is a,
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to reappoint Carla King and Gardner Trask.
Second.
made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. And to Mr. Bennett's point, next year we may consider just some open solicitations of roles that are coming up for expiration. When we reach out to the members who are there and expiring, we may also just say, remind people of the talent pool application process.
I think it's a good idea to have a minor league team waiting to move up. You never know when there's an opening or retirement.
Great, good idea. The town manager will report to the board on various items of interest.
I think the item of most interest tonight would be the storm that we had a couple days ago. Rodney alluded to the fact that when he put this program together, I think we were, I don't have it in front of me, but I will tell you how much the storm cost if you're interested to know. We had about 2 feet of snow in the blizzard. It hit on the weekend, so we had the crews were out from about 2 a.m. on Saturday through almost midnight on Sunday, actively battling with the storm. They pre-treated, and then they're out there managing and maintaining so that the roads remain safe and open. We expended about 28% of our annual snow budget this weekend, about $250,000 maintaining safe roadways during the 24 inches of snow. That leaves us at about 50% expended at this point. But I do want to note and really commend the Public Works Divisions and the Electric Department for the job they did getting ready for the storm and then managing it. Leaf Rockna from the Buildings Division, Chuck Farrell from the Streets Division, Phil Genwaldo, who runs our Equipment Division, David Lane and Clint Allen from the Electric Department. The amount of pre-planning that they did to line up tree companies and crews to respond in the event that we had widespread outages, the pre-treating that the crews did before the storm came so that the roads didn't freeze up, and really just sort of, working flat out to keep things safe, coming back Sunday to work on sidewalks and make sure that we had accessibility in the downtown and things like that. So not inexpensive, but really a terrific job by the crews. They're exhausted, but it's a point of pride, and I think that they have a lot to be proud of for the work they did this weekend.
And Steve, they were actually out till 3 a.m. Monday morning, pushing back the snow on the streets. And Monday morning, when I walked downtown, the sidewalks were very passable. They did a great job.
I was getting text messages over the weekend from colleagues asking if their schools were going to be open or closed, and I said, we'll be open Monday morning, not a problem in Danvers. So
They did a great job.
they really did.
Any other updates, Town Manager?
I was going to update the board on the process that Christy from the Library Trustees asked about, but having done that, as I said, we met with Dee and Kristen Perkins from the Human Rights and Inclusion Committee last week to have a conversation with them about the status of the process, and we're accepting applications as they come in, and we have a couple of meetings scheduled early next week with some nonprofits in the state that do a lot of work in that field to try to get their feedback as well. So that's all that I have.
Thank you. Any questions on the Town Manager updates? The board will consider consent calendar items as they appear. 1 common particulars and 2 second-class deals.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any questions on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Move to correspondence, select board new business, previous new public business, and select board closing comments. I'll leave Mr. Bennett to last, if you want to start.
I'll start. Thank you, first of all, once again, to all the DPW workers and all the divisions during the storm. It was pretty bad out there. I was out there. I actually was one of those crazy people driving, checking on some elderly clients and friends, just making sure they were okay and making phone calls. Danvers Housing Authority, COVID updates. Cindy Dunn continues over and over, I say it all the time, doing a great job with our seniors, making sure that, they're vaccinated, they have masks, all the supplies are needed there. Thank you very much to Cindy. I also wanted to, Matt can update the rail trail, but the mile marker renewals are going to be coming out in March. If anybody wants to sponsor a mile marker, talk to Larry Perot or Mark Jones. They're always looking for volunteers. They're going to have an Earth Day cleanup on April 22nd. Always looking for volunteers with that, too. And what else did I want to say? Oh, I want to say happy birthday to my firstborn grandchild, Olivia Rose Bernard, who turned 6 years old, so that was exciting news. So happy birthday, Olivia Rose, and that's about it. Thank you.
We didn't proclaim a day for Olivia.
I should have. I should have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Select Board Member Mills?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I don't have to go over into the splendid job of storm cleanup. I've seen a lot of storms in Danvers, and my house is close to Sylvan Street. I've heard a lot of plows go by over the years, and I've been through many scary moments when the lights flickered and were off for a couple of hours. I was astonished at the superb attention to our streets and to our electric supply. I didn't have a single blinking light. I don't know about anybody else. And I think that that's absolutely astounding, and it is a credit once again to the leadership and to the team in this town. Senior Center is essentially kind of closed because of concerns about the COVID still. The Human Rights and Inclusion Committee had a meeting last Wednesday, and I got to tell you, that committee is taking off like dynamite. We started years ago. I don't even know if we called it the Diversity Committee then. Whatever name it had, it has changed through the years, and it has also become a very, very active, contributing agency in our community at a very important time. So, good for that. And the only other thing that I want to say is, I keep reflecting upon the negative publicity that my town endured with respect to the locker room situation and the Schwartz stickers and the anti-Semitism. And I just have this overriding concern that the school superintendent and the school committee were totally disrespected and attacked as though they had failed in reversing the tide of anti-Semitism, homophobia, racism, which is rampant in this country. I read about it every single day. And all I can think of is, boy, did we take a beating because somebody in the local newspaper and somebody wants to protect their advertising dollar because they're going down and down and down. And it's just a darn shame. I don't know what I can do about it. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention was the school committee, excuse me, the Danvers High School and the Lappin Foundation, which I think is focused in Salem, are putting on a 6-week program concerning anti-Semitism. And I think Steve has attended all three. We've been through 3 sessions, and I've been through 3 sessions, and we have another one this coming Thursday, and we have 3 more Thursday nights. It is the most moving. Wow. I had an uncle in the Second World War. I grew up in the 40s. I had no idea, and to see what has happened and to relate that to the pain that is felt, not just at the Danvers Middle School, but throughout the country. Every time there's an expression of anti-Semitism, the pain that goes into the hearts of Jewish people, especially those with a more direct connection to the Holocaust and to the death camps. And as we are educated to the murder of 1.5 million children who were killed along with the murders of, I think, 15 million Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and people with Down syndrome and those that were considered not part of the Aryan race. It is a moving, important piece of life and history, and the fact that the Danvers High School is, doing this with the Lappin Foundation makes me very proud of the school and of the kids especially who attend that. So I don't think it's open to the public. I think you have to register for it. Steve, do you know about that?
It is, yeah, it's by registration.
Yeah, so I don't think you can just sign on. But it's important work, and our high school is one of the moving forces in that. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you, nothing else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Select Board Member Duggan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. First, I want to point out an ongoing problem with broadcasting public meetings out of the Holton Richmond Middle School, out of the multipurpose room. We've seen that personally, I think, when we had our meetings there, where DCAT struggled sometimes to find viable connection out to the internet. The wiring there seems to be obsolete at this point, even though it's, I think, maybe 15 years old. The cameras on the walls, I think, have been disabled. And this kind of came to a head last Monday night when the school committee was broadcasting from the multipurpose room. I, like many others, don't have full TV access through Verizon or Comcast. I use internet connection to go to the YouTube DCAT channel and watch the shows from there. And actually, DCAT actually uploads all their shows directly to YouTube, and then they are pulled down when they broadcast them on the television. So what happened on last Monday was that I could see, I tried to join a few minutes before 7. I could see there were about 50 other people also waiting. And we waited until maybe 20 or 25 after 7. And then we suddenly were able to view the meeting, but the meeting had already started at 7. And so not only were folks on the internet trying to watch it, but the recording didn't start until about 20 or 25 after. So the reason I bring this up is I think that if we want to continue to broadcast meetings out of that room, we should send maybe our IT staff to do kind of a root cause analysis and maybe come up with a long-term corrective action. If that's something that's not really in the scope of what they're familiar with, maybe we could get a vendor. But to just leave it as it is, it seems to be not really appropriate for residents that don't feel comfortable going in person. They'd rather view it on TV or on the computer.
I'm not familiar with the issues at the Monday meeting, but I would note that I have invited Aaron Henry and Colby Cousins, our Director of Land Use, and our IT Director to come to an upcoming Select Board meeting, potentially maybe March 1st, to provide this very update, which is work that IT's been working with DCAT to look at the technology investments that we should be making strategically to enable this moving forward. And Aaron has done some research into the actions that this board will have to take a vote to permit that moving forward. I believe that when the governor instituted some flexibility for towns and cities as part of the pandemic response, I think some of those permissions expire late spring. So communities that want to have options on the table moving forward for remote participation have to actively put that in place. So with the chair's permission, I would target one of the March meetings, maybe the first meeting in March, to get an update from Colby and Aaron on both of those questions.
Okay, thank you for that update. So I don't want to, this wasn't a slight on DCAT. They actually built out the great room at the senior center a couple of months ago, and they did a great job. That's really kind of like the go-to place, I think, because they have the large screen TV, so you can see the blueprints of plans. And so their staff are highly trained, so this isn't to be detrimental to them. I think they try to do the best they can with what they have there at the middle school. So any improvements?
And with the new contracts in place with the providers, PCAT's interested in working with us to make some investments like that. So
Okay.
this room, the senior center, the band room at the high school are equipped. That, Holden Richmond, that space is just not conducive.
it's
But
too
we're looking at like the
big.
police training room and some other sites
Yeah.
that might be logical for putting that type of infrastructure in place.
Yeah, because I see going forward, we won't all be back in the same room, so we'll still use this hybrid model where some members may still be at home, they may not feel comfortable. I think the April 1st is the governor's deadline for when remote meetings have to end, but I think we could still kind of leverage that ability to, accommodate, maybe there's committee members or board members who are not comfortable and they may be immune compromised or whatever. So this COVID isn't going anywhere. So we want to make sure that everybody stays safe. If people are comfortable being in person, that's fine. But if not, then we should be able to accommodate them. I think we've learned that lesson over the last couple of years. So, all right. Well, that's all I have on that topic. So next. I'm just getting up to speed learning about the Massachusetts Municipal Association. So they have this annual thing going on right now, and they had a webinar yesterday that I attended. It had to do with a municipal law update, and one of the topics that they discussed was the use of the ARPA funds, and I guess the U.S. Treasury Department has kind of released some final rulings on how that money can actually be spent, and they've sort of tweaked some of the requirements or some of the ways that money can be used. And I know that because it's a grant, town meeting really doesn't have a say on how the money's allocated. But I think the town departments, I remember the list that I saw recently, and I think it's on the website for ARPA funding. It's not surprising how fast you can spend $8 million, so.
Well, our expert is at the podium now, but the short answer is the tweaks that the Treasury Department made it a lot easier and more straightforward. So the plan isn't changing, but the requirement, it's going to be a lot easier for the accounting department and finance to comply, I think is how I understand it, but I don't know if you want to add to that, right?
That was pretty much, yeah, if anything, they increased the latitude on which you can use the funds. One of the big ones which we used is revenue replacement. So they allowed right off the top $10 million accounting as revenue reduction to any community. So essentially, if we wanted to, we could book it all as revenue reduction. So we'll keep the categories that we presented to the board that the board blessed, but it didn't hinder us in any way. It just made probably some of the back-end reporting a little bit easier on our end. So.
Sure. I think it was just a cleanup, and I think communities had questions, and this was just a way to kind of consolidate to make it more workable.
Can you, if you don't mind, can I jump into your comments for a second? You just remind me, as a board of director member with the MMA, I feel remiss for not noting that because the annual meeting in person was canceled this year, there will be a series of webinars available throughout the month. And if you go to the MMA website, mma.org, they have a list there that you can look at and register online for to participate.
I like that.
Yeah, so really nice topics. I was registered for that and I missed it, so I'm glad that you were able to.
And just,
I'm registered for 3, one tomorrow morning,
Yeah, I
the
like that.
10th and the 16th.
I have
One
a
of it's
couple too.
climate.
I'll miss
favorite.
getting all the free pens at the trade show, but.
Sorry, Matt.
so just one more point on it, ARPA. So one of the rules that was finalized was for Category 4, which is the infrastructure improvements. And I know it's kind of too late in the game for getting that on our list, but something to think about, because at the last meeting, I mentioned the water meters, and this kind of plays into it. So originally, the infrastructure improvements from the Treasury said it could only be to the private property line. And so they made a revision where it's actually all the way through the private property into the dwelling unit, and specifically for lead-type water delivery system, lead pipes. And so we know that not just in Massachusetts, but throughout the country, communities struggle with identifying households that have lead pipes. And so that's a problem for children and for pregnant women, because there are no safe levels of lead. And so it got me to thinking, does our water department somehow provide a service that, if a homeowner wanted to have, because we have a lot of old housing stock, you know, 50s, 40s, earlier than that. So there's got to be some homes that have lead delivery pipes into their basement. Do we have any way of tracking that? Do you know?
I don't know about tracking, but we will test water for free. Anybody who wants to have water tested, we do that through the plant, and we do testing every single day. So we do random sampling, and then we do targeted sampling at the direction of the state. When we bought our house, we had you can get it tested for free. You fill it up, they'll pick it up, bring it back to you. And actually, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea this spring to have the water. The chair and I have been talking about. We're behind on bringing the committees in to talk, but I think that the Water and Sewer Commission and the Water Department coming in to speak would be a good update at some point this spring.
That's something that should be publicized, that people may be not, they may be thinking about it, but they probably assume there's some kind of cost associated with it that may be, too high for them. If they were to know that they could have their water tested, they could just maybe bring in a bottle of water, like a sterile bottle. Because it's not just the lead pipes. I think prior to 1989, the soldering for copper pipes also had a lead component to it. And so I think that's why the DPW suggests first thing in the day to run your water for a minute or two just to be on the safe side. And then, so that's all I have on that topic. And then just one last thing. So again, kudos to the staff that cleared the streets. But I specifically want to point out the sidewalks are unbelievably clean compared to what I've seen in the past, where you'd have these huge piles on the corners and you'd have school kids climbing up over them, probably because they wanted to, but also because they had to. That's a lot of work. It's one thing to drive a pickup truck around with a plow all night. It's another thing to get out there and get those sidewalks looking clear like they do, because that was a lot of snow, and that's a lot of work running that little plow thing down the sidewalk. You need to have a front-end loader guy coming along to help you, because you have some of the snow you got to get rid of. But the sidewalks, because sometimes we forget about pedestrians. If we're driving around all day, we don't really think about people that may need to depend on walking, and having them walk in a road in this kind of weather is a very dangerous thing. We hear about that, people getting run down. So I'm glad the DPW has taken sidewalk clearing very seriously, especially in the downtown, because I see sometimes where businesses don't really take it seriously. So kudos to the staff that kind of stepped up and did that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll echo the thanks to the DPW. They deserve every bit of the accolades that we've been providing for them. But I don't want to miss out on the enterprise businesses as well, the water, sewer, and electric. During the storm, I looked out my window, and there were 3 line trucks replacing a telephone pole that snapped. They're out there in the elements as well, and they should get kudos for that work. And I'm certain that there are water main breaks during storms. I'm certain there are hydrants that get hit by mistake. So I'm sure, though I don't have a direct experience, I'm sure there are water and sewer experts, professionals out there as well.
But we had a total of 1 pole break in the storm, and I'm glad to know it was outside your window.
My wife said, "Why is there flashing yellow lights on out?" And we looked, and it was a neighbor down the street, and the neighbor kindly got on Facebook and gave kudos for the department to come out as well. It was up on Fellow Street. So the DPW deserves all the credit they get, but they're not the only game in the. It's a team effort.
It's a team effort.
I did tell the board I would mention this over the past week or so. The town manager and I have received probably a dozen or more requests for the Board of Selectmen to create a warrant article for a home rule petition regarding a recall process. Several recent events have identified the need for, the lack of a recall opportunity in Danvers. Many cities and towns have it, maybe cities and towns don't. Many of us thought it was a charter change. I did ask the town manager to find out what the reality of that was. It is not a charter change. It would be a home rule petition approved by town meeting to go to the state legislature to petition for the ability for a recall process. It was most recently done in Wenham when they lost several of their members. And what I've asked for I would ask that the board consider a warrant article and to accommodate the request, of the citizens. I've asked the town manager to get sample recall petition, recent ones, and if it's amenable to the board, I'd like to create a subcommittee, craft language, and then bring it back to the board for consideration of a warrant article.
Gardner, would a citizen's petition by 100 citizens or so?
That could serve the same purpose.
That could be done that way as well?
We were specifically asked in the emails, I will say there was at least a dozen of them, for a selectman's warrant article, and I think that either path is possible.
Okay.
But I think that we could embrace this and discuss this as a board about whether it should be I'd like to get the language down, the framework down for the board to consider. I'm not asking you to approve a warrant article right now. I'm asking you to just let the town manager, myself, and I've asked David Mills from a legal perspective if he would weigh in and present some sort of draft for the consideration of the board to be modified and changed or not pursued at the board's direction.
Sounds good.
Could I just speak?
Sure, absolutely.
I certainly will take part in that study and proposal, but I don't understand our role as making any recommendation now that such a warrant article, A, is necessary, B, is appropriate, or 3 is something that we want to pursue. So, yeah, I'll take part in it. It's like to bring something back to this board to then discuss. But I don't think it's, yeah, I got the email too, and I was a little bit, yeah, I was kind of surprised of it. So it's different. It's different from the Danvers that I have, been active in government for 50 years here. So, yeah, I want to take part in that, but not on the understanding that we will be proposing something that this board should do. I think that we will be providing a discussion vehicle for this board to discuss the concept. Does that
Yes,
fit with you,
that's
Gord?
accurate. I'm not asking for an approval of a warrant, a selectman's warrant. I'm asking for the board to understand that we're going to set up a small, quick subcommittee, and at the next meeting or the meeting after, we will present language that if this board adopts, will go to town meeting for town meeting to approve. Town meeting would then approve, if town meeting were, the process is pretty straightforward. It's the numbers and mechanics inside it, but basically, town meeting would have to approve a home rule petition to be presented to the state legislature. The state legislature would approve the ability in the framework that is defined for a recall election. And that recall election will be held with certain stipulations and thresholds and timing by what we suggest, and based on others who have successfully done this recently. We'll look at what has happened in other communities. We'll adjust it for the nuances and uniquenesses of Danvers based on our size and other factors. Present it, come back to the board for discussion. And at that point, we'll discuss and decide. This is not to be perceived to be any, it's not for any one person or role. It actually is for any elected official in Danvers. I think just recent public events have highlighted that we don't have that opportunity, and someone was looking to fill that hole. And while you saw one email, I can tell you there were another dozen. Is the board amenable to that? To the plan to do a subcommittee and bring back some draft?
Yeah, I wouldn't say no.
Okay. All right. I will remind the board that we received an email today that by the end of the month, as employees or elected officials, we have to finish a certificate, conflict of interest law. It's online. There are 2 forms to fill out in the online, which results in this certificate you can print out. And then we have to provide it back to HR. I'm going to ask you to pass this down to the town manager. I did mine today because I had the 20 minutes I needed. And then this is a new thing. I want to plant a seed, and that's probably not the right metaphor here. Years ago, the town meeting established a medical marijuana zone, and we do have a single facility in town that provides that for a very specific, under specific guidelines. But we did say there wouldn't be, the town meeting passed 2 things. One is a zone, and one is a prohibition on commercial sales within that zone. I'd just like the board to think about whether we should revisit the commercial sale aspect of this. The reason I say that is I was one of the proponents of the zoning at the time because it was brand new. The Cannabis Commission hadn't been formed. There was a whole bunch of unknowns, and sometimes we're a little bit cautious in our approach. But there was a recent news article that the revenue from medical marijuana sales has exceeded the meals tax, tax income.
Medical marijuana.
Medical marijuana, still medical marijuana, but.
I think it's recreational.
Thank you. Thank you for the right terminology. I'm not asking for opinion now. I'm just asking, I'd like to bring it up at some future meeting and see if after this town meeting, see if the board has an appetite to revisit that portion of the zoning and consider whether we want to reevaluate. So those are my comments. And 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I will turn it over to Select Board Member Bennett for his comments and final words.
Thank you. So while we're saying happy birthday to grandchildren, I'd like to wish a happy birthday for my great-granddaughter, Anaya, who will be 4 years old tomorrow. We're going to have a pizza party. And her sister is 2 months old today.
Happy
Thank you.
birthday.
Well, Jack turned 5, and we didn't give him a pizza party. We gave him his first COVID shot. So
Oh, that's funny. Remind everybody that the senior center has raffle tickets available for sale for restaurant gift certificates. There's 3 prizes. The first one is $700 worth of gift certificates, $400 and $300. Tickets at $10. Still time to get your lucky ticket. The drawing is Valentine's Day, the 14th. So please support the senior center. And as usual, please thank a vet when you see a vet. And good night, Danvers.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned. Good night, Danvers. Thank you.